The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised.
Bumblefoot. Bumblefoot.
Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
They let us play with all our toys. They let us think that we're big boys. They let us make the louder noise, but women rule the world. They let us think we're Superman.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you. For you. I will stop till I reach the top just to be there with you.
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
Dad, you gotta stop haunting the ghost. It's scaring them.
All right, seriously, put down the pointy sticks.
Oh, the deeper I fall.
Okay! Game on! Game on! Game on!
The password is...
Alright.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you.
Seriously, Dave? Really? Aren't you a little old for a tinfoil hat?
Hello, Toby. Bye-bye. Love you. Bye-bye.
Please take your seat about us. There will be a perfect pickup. Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition and liftoff.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. It's good to have you along for the ride on this Tuesday, July 25th. Wednesday, July 26th. If you're on the East Coast or across the pond, hope you had a great day and night. We are live right here in the Great White North on top of the sunshiny mountains of central British Columbia as we are here 7 days a week. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on our terrestrial stations. WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are live on spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Like our music? Then rock with us to Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy. Yes, Bumblefoot is the official sound of Spaced Out Radio. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you could do so on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. You can find us on iHeartRadio in the United States. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes. We're also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, and Stitcher. And, of course, our website is SpacedOutRadio.com. And if you head over to Patreon.com for as low as $1 a month, you can become a patron of Spaced Out Radio as well. Now, if you want to take part in this show, you got to do me a favor. You got to sign into one of our chat rooms, either on Revolution Radio, Spreaker, the UPRN chat room, or join us on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're a Twitter follower, use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. I will get to your questions and comments in there as well. Now, if you head to our website, for just $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. And as of right now, you can go to the Spaced Out Radio store, pick up a t-shirt, posters, stickers. Don't forget your Paracon tickets for this fall as well. We have the Encounter Online, dealing with everything paranormal, courtesy of our editors, Eric Markham and Everett Thiemer. You can check out my latest blog there as well. And if you've had an experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. And if you're into aliens and UFOs, check out our affiliate, UFO Seekers. Tim Doyle is bringing his game to the Spaced Out Radio website as well. One of the biggest mysteries out there is whether or not we can see into the future, past, or even present, yet in a different location. For years, there have been both medical, military, and personal studies into remote viewing. Remote viewing is the practice of seeking impressions about a distant or unseen target, purportedly using ESP, or sensing with the mind. Lori Williams is a professional controlled remote viewer, an experienced instructor of CRV, and a certified hypnotherapist. Lori has been researching, practicing, and studying the science of controlled remote viewing since 1996. Highly respected among both students and peers as an expert in the field of remote viewing, Lori is considered to be one of the best out there across this planet and most experienced remote viewing instructors available today. For the first time to Spaced Out Radio, we welcome Lori Williams to the show. Lori, thank you so much. You are going the distance tonight. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Dave. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and doing this topic with me, because I tell you, I've never remote viewed, but it's something that absolutely intrigues me to be able to see what is going on in different places at different times. I know a plethora of remote viewers, but I've never really done it myself. And we're going to get into that a lot tonight. How did you get started in all of this? What intrigued you about it?
Well, the thing that I really love about it is that it feels safe. A lot of people want to explore that part of themselves they don't understand, or they've had some experiences they don't understand. They want to check it out, but they're scared because we tend to be afraid of that which we don't understand, right? So when people have experiences that they don't understand, it's like the tail's wagging the dog and they can't control it. And so CRV is kind of like a safe platform you can crawl out on and explore your own abilities very safely. And so that was really what I loved about it. I knew stuff was going on, and I wanted a safe, scientific, respected way to explore it at the time. That was my big impetus to get into CRV.
Well, one of those things that attracts a lot of people is their own intuition. Were you intuitive growing up?
Definitely. I definitely had a lot of experiences as I was growing up as a kid, And I didn't, crazy little things. When my mom was talking to my grandfather on the phone, and I could hear him in my mind saying to her that he had just bought a Toyota Corolla. And I didn't know what a Toyota Corolla was because I was really little, like maybe 3 or 5 or something. And she got off the phone and she said, "Oh, my dad just bought a brand new Toyota Corolla." And I remember thinking, well, that's odd because that's what I heard him say in my mind. I couldn't hear his side of the conversation. But I would have these experiences as a little kid, really tiny, and I really wondered what that was all about. And then as I got to that age, the age where all the weird stuff starts happening when you're 12 and 13 years old, and they say that poltergeist activity happens when there's teenagers in the house. I had tons of poltergeist activity happening in the house, freaking my friends out, my mom out, and I thought it was all really great because my whole goal was to not have a boring life. I was like, okay, as long as it's not boring, I'm good. But it was really, really crazy. And so then when I was about 14, I found the Lord, and I got really involved in Christianity. And so they looked upon that as, watch out, this because, you're walking a fine line, you got to watch out about this. It could be dangerous. And so, I kind of was trying to pocket that, put it away, kind of suppress it. But I found that the more spiritual I became, the more unsuppressible any kind of abilities I had were happening. I mean, just, extraordinarily, just kind of bursting out at the seams. So I decided that can't be evil. It just can't be. And when I came back to the States in 1991 after being abroad many years in a missionary setting, I really wanted to explore all parts of myself. I wanted to stop being afraid of it, stop suppressing it, and really check it out. So I was looking for something. I was really looking for something that would make sense to me. And I ended up having a very odd, serendipitous experience in Colorado. I was there to attend a conference on post-traumatic stress disorder. At the time, I was working with refugees, resettling refugees, and I happened to listen to a man who was a speaker at this conference who was absolutely amazing. I was enthralled with his speaking, and that night I dreamt that I was asking that man, who was a total stranger to me, if he happened to know this colonel that I had just met in Amarillo, Texas, where I was living. And the next morning, when I got up from this dream, it was a very simple dream, but I get there, and there's the guy waiting outside, and I'm waiting outside. It was just the two of us, so I finally just blurted out, "I had a dream about you last night." And he said, "Really? What did you dream?" So I told him about the dream, and he ended up asking me what branch of the military this colonel that I had just met was in, and I said something about military intelligence. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting. I was in military intelligence." And right as he said that, the cover of a new book that had just shown up on the new arrivals shelves in the bookstores flashed in my mind. It was turquoise and black, and I said, without thinking, it was sort of like, did I say that with my out loud voice? I just said, "Have you seen that new book?" And he said, "What new book?" And I said, "I don't remember the name of it. It's turquoise and black, and it has something to do with psychics in the military." And he said, "Are you asking me about Psychic Warrior by David Morehouse?" And I said, "Yes, that's it. That's the book." And he said, "I can't believe you're asking me about that book because I was the psychologist in charge of that military program for 20 years. And then he started leaning in and asking me all kinds of questions like, "Do you have a photographic memory for numbers? Are you artistic? Do you remember maps easily?" And he just, was really excited, saying, "Oh, we would have loved to have you in our program." And I was getting kind of nervous at this point, kind of backing away, imagining men in black knocking at my door. And then he just said, "When you get back, you've got to go on the internet and you've got to look up remote viewing." And that was the first time I heard that term. So when I got back to Amarillo, I went on the internet, and the first thing that popped up was Lynn Buchanan's website. And Lynn Buchanan is the author of The Seventh Sense. He was the database manager in the military unit, and they put him in the military unit. They asked him to come in because he had kind of blitzed out all the computers. He had a real problem with psychokinetic energy, where he would blitz things out and different things like that. So he was put into the military unit because of that, and he ended up training a lot of people with CRV, controlled remote viewing, and I happened to see his website, send him an email. He invited me to come meet him and his wife in a couple of weeks when I was going to be traveling to Maryland, where they lived, and I ended up spending 5 hours in their home. They ended up becoming like second parents to me, and so I found that, and he was such a patient, gentle teacher. He was the perfect person to teach someone like me who was kind of fearful in the beginning, and so it was really, really helpful.
So as a child, when you started noticing your own personal gifts, what were you seeing?
Oh, well, the very first earliest memory that I have is of these beings coming to me in the middle of the night in my dreams and pulling me out of my body and taking me flying along, and we would communicate telepathically. And, of course, I was really tiny, so my communication was like, "Are you God?" and their response, I could sense humor, and the response was nonverbal, but I understood them to say, "No, we're not God." And then I was, "Are you the devil?" "No, we're not the devil." And then I just decided, okay, they must be angels. Children just accept certain things. Okay, well, if they're not God, they're not the devil. They have to be angels, right? And I would tell my mom, "Mom, these angels came and got me in the middle of the night. We'd go flying around, and they would take me to these classrooms, and we would learn things." I could never remember what we learned. I just remember that we were in the classrooms. And I would say, "And Mom, we didn't have to talk with our mouths because we could talk with our minds." And I would be so excited. And my poor mom didn't know what to make of me. She'd just be like, "Oh, my God." So,
It's weird when you just mentioned that story. I just had a complete deja vu moment.
Really? Did you remember something from your own past?
I swear I've heard that before from you.
Maybe you have. I have told that story before on other radio shows.
Yes, but you have to realize, as someone who has his own radio show, I don't have time to listen to the other radio shows.
Oh, that's good.
But seriously, this was very, very interesting. I'm kind of shaking a little bit here because I'm like, where have I heard somebody say this before? Those exact words. Man, I hate when that happens. I hate the deja vu thing. I totally do.
Well, there's so many explanations of why deja vu happens, but you never know. You might have heard it from somewhere before, from me. You might have, if you didn't hear it on a radio show, maybe you read it somewhere or saw it on my website. Or
no, you don't little love me, but I'm somewhat in tune as well.
That's good. So you think it might be a real deja vu, or maybe
I am positive that is a real deja vu. I've had aliens at my window during this show, so nothing surprises me too much anymore when it comes to that.
And also, we don't even know what reality is. I had an experience once, and I've never told this experience on anything. So if you have a deja vu on this, we know for sure you've never heard it. But actually, this was just a few years ago, where I laid down to take a nap, and I had this experience where this being came, again, snatching me out of my body. That's been happening my whole life. And I couldn't see the being, and I felt as though these arms were kind of wrapped around my midriff, and that this being was behind me with his arms wrapped around my midriff, and we were taking off at lightning speed out into outer space, and the Earth grew smaller and smaller, and then suddenly we start charging back towards the Earth at lightning speed, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, coming towards us, and then all of a sudden we're over these trees, and these arms just let go of me, and I start falling really fast towards the trees, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, uh-oh. And then all of a sudden, the trees are above me, and I'm falling upward, like towards the sky, but there's trees above me, and I hear this voice say, "Reality is not what you think it is." And I woke up, and I'm sitting up in bed, and I'm like, wow, what was that? Because it was so real and so visceral, that I was just like, whew. And so that really shook me up, and from then on, every time anything weird happens, I'm just like, well, reality's not what we think it is.
So what is reality then?
That's the thing. Nobody really knows. There's all these theories of the holographic universe, and that we're living in a hologram. And Jim and I frequently have these experiences where we feel as though we're almost in two places at once, living in two realities. And I'm sure you've probably had people on your show talking about the Mandela effect, and so many people are experiencing strange things with the Mandela effect. The house we're living in right now is an Earthship. It's an off-grid Earthship, made out of Earth-filled tires. I'm sure you've heard of Earthships, perhaps. But anyway, when we first came to look at this property, we both commented on this interesting desk that was made from a door, a white door, and the door was the desktop. And so we were talking about how they made it and how interesting and what a great repurposing of stuff. And then we left. We had only come to look at the property, and we left. And then we talked over whether we wanted to buy it, et cetera, et cetera. And we eventually went online because we had heard that somebody said, "Oh, I saw that property online." So we went to look at it online, and in place of that desk was a desk that had like a Formica top, like a salmon-colored Formica top. And I said, "Oh, I wonder where the desk with the door is." And he said, "I don't know. That's kind of weird. Maybe they replaced that salmon-colored thing later with the desk with the door." So eventually we buy the property, and we come here, and there is no desk with the door. There's only this desk with this Formica top. And we both had a very distinctive conversation about the door and how they repurposed it and all this. And, and we come back, and it's not there. It doesn't exist, and apparently never did. So we're like, what was that reality in which we had that conversation that we both remember?
Doesn't that just drive you nuts, though, when that happens?
Yeah.
I want to get to Mario's question here, because we like to keep our audience very interactive during this show. He is asking, the beings that you thought took you as a child, what did they look like?
It's really interesting because that was happening from the time, I'm guessing from like when I was like 2, 3, 4, and that was happening for a number of years when I was little, and I just remember that they were dressed in dark clothing. I always thought of angels as being dressed in white, but these beings were dark, and they had dark clothing, and I don't remember their faces or anything. I just remember that we were flying, and that we could communicate, and the communication felt very gentle, very amused. They seemed to be very amused by me, and there was a loving sense to it. So even though they had dark clothing on, almost like a solid piece of robe or something, and their hair was dark, but I don't recall their faces at all. And when I was having these experiences a few years ago of these beings with the arms wrapped around my midriff where I couldn't see them, I remember having a conversation with Melvin Riley. Mel Riley was the very first remote viewer in the unit, and the only one to have served in two tours of duty in the unit. And he and I are really close, and I was talking to him about these beings coming and snatching me out of my body, and he said, they're just about to reveal themselves to you, and so the next time you see them, see if you can really get a good look. So Mario, this is when I really finally got a good look, because I had this experience again where it snatched me out, and so this time I grabbed the hands that were, around I grabbed these arms, and I grabbed them really tight, and I peeled them back, and I spun around so I could get a good look. And this being was definitely not human, but it was humanoid in that it had 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 hands, 2 feet, and it had fingers, and everything was elongated, like really long arms, long thin legs, long hands, long fingers, and really white, very, very white skin. And then the face was covered, like it almost looked like those mannequins that are made of muslin or have muslin on their faces, that you see in the windows sometimes, that instead of having faces with eyes and noses and mouths, they have kind of a covering on their heads, and they're bald, and it kind of looked like that. It didn't have any features, and that was kind of creepy. But anyway, so it was a very, again, these experiences have a very different sense. I found that a lot of times experiences that you have when you're sleeping, there are ordinary dreams that are your subconscious mind just working its thing out, right, from the day or whatever. And then you have dreams that are precognitive, and they have a very different feel to them. And then you have these experiences that are like out-of-body experiences or really wild nighttime journeys or, strange, just really bizarre experiences. And this was one of those bizarre experiences where you just know that there's something about it that was very real.
Have those experiences continued into adulthood?
Oh, yeah. They sure have. They've continued my whole life. I've never stopped having them.
No.
I go through some dormant periods where, like, I'll go for a few months where nothing exciting happens, and I don't have any weird dreams or anything. And then I'll kick into a season. I call them seasons, where you have a season where a lot of stuff's really going on, and I don't know what influences that.
So you've been a lifelong abductee, and I have to ask this then, because your father was a journalist, very popular journalist in radio, and here he is, and journalists are real five senses kind of people. I know that from my own experiences. Did you ever have a conversation with him of what was happening to you, and did he believe you?
You know, it's really that's an interesting question that no one's ever asked me before, Dave. My dad was definitely very nuts and bolts about everything, and he also majored in debate when he was in college, and he ended up with a PhD in broadcasting. And every now and then, you know, he'd want to sit down and talk, and we'd sit down and we'd talk about things, and he loved ghost stories. He would write really spooky stories, and he had books on his library shelf, you know, Tales of the Macabre, you know, and stuff like that. He loved all that stuff. But we never talked about my experiences that I can ever remember. We never had a conversation about it. My mom and I did all the time, but my dad and I never did. And when I got religion, he was pretty upset by it. He didn't like that at all because he was a non-believer, and he definitely didn't want me dedicating my life to something that you couldn't prove. You know, that really would bother him. But interestingly, years later, when I was no longer in the religious group and I had a real job and that kind of, and he was happy with the way my life was going, we sat down and had a conversation about controlled remote viewing. And I had just gotten into it, and I brought my manuals to show him. I traveled across the U.S. to visit him, and I brought my manual, and I showed him everything, and I showed him sessions that I had done, and he got so happy and so excited. He loved it. If he could have, he would have taken the course himself. He would have flown and gone to New Mexico to meet with Lynn Buchanan and study with him. But what was so funny is my mom used to make jokes about it, and she would say, "Oh, Lori and her spook show," you know, or something like that. And he would say, "Kathy, don't you make fun of this. Now, this was done by the U.S. military, and this is the real deal." And he would he would chide her for joking about it. And now she doesn't joke about it at all because she's had me do some sessions for her. She said it was the scariest thing she ever saw in her life, which is funny because I don't want people to think that it was scary. It really wasn't. It was just that it was accurate, and that scared her. But anyway, so yeah, asking about my parents and their opinions on this, my dad really loved CRV, and we never had a discussion about what happened to me as a child at all, or the ghost stuff that was happening in the house. Now, my mom would get really freaked out by it. And my dad had several experiences. My mom and dad had several experiences with ghosts in the house as well. And he definitely believed in that, even though he was really a very down-to-earth kind of guy.
Isn't it so much easier when your parents accept your gifts? My father at first did not believe me, and my dad is my idol. And then all of a sudden, I sat him down about a year later, explained to him the radio show, explained to him my experiences, and I remember he was sitting in my recliner. And he kind of sat back in the recliner, took a deep breath, and he came back forward and looked at me and he said, "Son, I'm 65 years old. The one thing that I've learned in my life is I don't know everything. I believe you."
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
And then earlier this year, a few months ago, I run a ghost hunt at the local museum here once a month. So I finally convinced my dad, when he was up visiting, to come with me. And be damned if he's holding a K2 meter, and I realize they're not the most accurate, but he's holding one, and it is going absolutely haywire. And there's a little girl in the house where he was. And she used to clamor on to certain people. Well, she clamored on to him and would not let him go. And so we started asking questions, and she started responding via the color lights on the K2 meter. And my father is just shaking. And now he wants to come up here every weekend I do the ghost hunt just so he can go take part in it.
That's so fun. I just remembered as you were telling that story that I had this really amazing ghost experience. And I told my dad about it, and he was enthralled. And it happened, actually, this experience just happened, I don't remember what year it was, but it was a few years right before my dad died. My dad died in 2004, and I think this experience happened in like 2003. So about a year before he died, I was visiting my husband, my now husband. We were not married yet, but I was visiting his family farm, and they have a building there that was built. The house was built in 1865. It's an adobe house. And so, I was sleeping, and there's 4 bedrooms. I was sleeping in one of the bedrooms, and I wasn't feeling well. In the middle of the night, I got up, went to the bathroom. I was coming out of the bathroom, and I opened the door, and there was a man standing there. So I screamed because I didn't expect someone to be standing there at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he was about maybe 10, 12 feet away from me. And I'm really myopic. I can't see without my glasses. And I thought it was Jim, my now husband. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but you scared me." And then, and he was standing with his hand on his chest, kind of looking at me in a concerned posture. And I stood there staring at him, and he didn't respond when I said, "I'm sorry, but you scared me." He didn't move. He just stood there and stared at me. And he was as solid as you are. I mean, he did not look like a ghost. He's standing there, and he's staring at me, and then all the hair on my body kind of went electric, and I got chills, and I realized this was not Jim. And I stood there, and I stared at him, and he stared at me. It felt like an eternity. It was probably 2 minutes, but it felt like forever. And then really slowly, he just sort of faded away. So I went running to tell Jim and wake him up. I woke him up. I go into his room, and I leapt on the bed, and I said, "I just saw a ghost." And he's like, "You just saw a ghost? Oh, my gosh, what did it look like?" And I described him. And so the next morning, we stayed up all night talking. And then as morning came, he said, "I think we need to try to find out who this was." He said, "I'm going to run and get Grandma's Ouija board." And I'm looking at him like, "Grandma's Ouija board?" I didn't know how old Jim was at the time, but I thought, this guy's not a spring chicken. How old is Grandma's Ouija board? and plus, because of my religious background when I was in the missionary group, Ouija boards, they're dangerous and evil. So he brings out this old Ouija board, really old Ouija board, in this crumbling box from William Fuld. And I'm thinking, at the time I was still very much into that whole mindset of, that I had been in before with very fundamental Christianity ideas. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is bad. So I said, we have to pray. So he says, "Okay, let's pray." So I said, "Lord, we're going to do this, but please protect us." And then afterwards I thought, that's kind of like saying, "Lord, I'm going to fornicate, but please don't let me get a venereal disease." It's like... So I'm like, what's going to happen? So we did this Ouija board, and really a Ouija board, a tarot card deck, reading palms, all these things are really just tools that people use to access the subconscious. And they're all you're just really all accessing the same essential source, which is the subconscious mind. So what came through on the Ouija board was that this man's name was Hezekiah Hatch, and that he had been traveling back and forth between New Mexico and Texas between 1924 and 1925, and that there was this accident, and these children were killed, these 2 children that were traveling with him, and that he was not killed, he wasn't even injured, but the children were killed. And there used to be a road that went right by the farmhouse door that they later did away with, and they built a big highway later further away. But a lot of people used to get killed on that road because it was really dangerous when it would rain. It was like a windy 2-lane road. And so after it's over, we're thinking, crazy, Hezekiah Hatch. That's not like John Doe. So the next day we go to his folks' house, they had computers and internet because the farmhouse didn't have any. And we type in Hezekiah Hatch into Google, and up comes a photograph of this man that I had seen, that had appeared to me. And it was definitely him. And it said he was an ancestor of Senator Orrin Hatch, and that he was commissioned by the Mormons to evangelize Texas and New Mexico between 1924 and 1925. Now, it didn't mention an accident, it didn't say anything like that, but the fact that he had been traveling back and forth between Texas and New Mexico between 24 and 25, and that there really was a person that was named Hezekiah Hatch, and that he looked just like the man that appeared to me, was just shook us to the foundation. And my dad absolutely loved when I told him that whole thing that happened. He was just blown away by it.
How did you mix religion with your own paranormal / extraterrestrial experiences?
Well, first I have to tell you that I never ever dreamed that what was happening to me was extraterrestrial abduction. And whenever anybody, when I was in the mission group, whenever anybody would bring up ETs or even reincarnation, I would just it was kind of like I would wrap it in a package and put it on a shelf. I didn't even look at it. And I know that sounds, probably the people listening are shocked. How could I go from that to what I am now, where I'm teaching about consciousness, we're pioneering the frontiers of consciousness, I've been to other planets now, I've communicated with aliens, I've talked to Bigfoot, It's I definitely have had a lot of wild experiences that I would have never dreamed I would have had. And I also did not want to accept any mediumship abilities, which I was having all the time. I was running into ghosts right and left and having them communicate to me all the time, and I would constantly just try to suppress it because I just was not into any of that. So that was one of the big roles that controlled remote viewing and Lynn Buchanan played in my life, is that it became a segue, a way to reconcile belief systems with experiences, because prior to that, I didn't have a way to reconcile those two things. And so that made it more frightening for me, as just having no control, having uncontrolled psychic experiences and uncontrolled visits from beings that I didn't know what they were, who they were, and all these different things that were happening, running into ghosts and things, having precognitive dreams that would come true the next day over and over again, or having visions that saved my life, and all kinds of things that happened my whole life. I also want anyone listening to understand that you don't have to have had a single unusual experience in your whole life, and you can still learn controlled remote viewing, because it was created for people who were considered to be total normal people who never had a single, who feel like they don't have a psychic bone in their body. That's who this was created for. And it's a wonderful way, a very safe way to explore your own abilities, because everybody has abilities. Even if you've never had one experience in your life, you still have abilities. We were born with it. Like cats have tails, humans have psychic ability. It's a normal part of being human. Our culture kind of suppresses it, but it's still a normal part of being human.
Mm-hmm. How did you first learn of remote viewing?
That man that I met outside the door at the conference, that was my first hearing of it. And then when I looked it up online and ran into Lynn Buchanan's website and wrote him a very tenuous email saying, could I learn this? Do you think I could learn this? Because one of the things his website said, not only did it explain how controlled remote viewing works and how it's a study of the left brain and right brain functions and the way that the subconscious mind works with the conscious, and how the subconscious mind is actually connected to everything that ever was or ever will be. I mean, it's connected to all knowledge. So if you think of your own subconscious mind as being plugged in to God or to light beings or to the Akashic records or to the great big cosmic database in the sky, if however you want to look at it, the subconscious mind is connected to all those things. And so we actually have the ability to tap into that. But the big obstacle is that conscious and subconscious don't speak the same language. That's where we run into trouble. Because how often do you have a dream that you don't understand, for example? It's all symbolic and you just can't figure it out. The subconscious mind has its own way of communicating, sometimes through body aches and pains. You get a neck ache or a headache, or your stomach ties up in knots. That's the way the subconscious often communicates. And a lot of times the way I'll point it out to people is, how often are you driving and your mind is drifting off and you're thinking about something that is really bothering you, and suddenly you pull in your driveway and you think, how did I get here? I don't even remember driving. That's because your conscious mind took off thinking. Your subconscious mind took over and drove you safely home. So the body becomes the link between the conscious and subconscious minds. And this body as the link is a wonderful thing, because if you think about it, your body does constantly communicate with the subconscious mind. Right now your heart is beating, your lungs are breathing, all these processes are taking place that you're not consciously even thinking about. But if I asked you, could you raise your right hand? you could consciously make your hand go up in the air. So the conscious and the subconscious both work through the body. So controlled remote viewing is like a martial art for the mind, and it's actually very physical. I mean, you write on a piece of paper, you keep your eyes open, you say everything that's coming into your head out loud, and you have specific places on the paper to write what's coming through. And as that's happening, you're tapping in to all that ever is or ever was. So if somebody had a target they wanted you to remote view that took place 200 years ago, you can literally become a time traveler. Controlled remote viewing can be literally like a time machine, and you can experience things. And as you get really, it's like a martial art, so it requires discipline and it requires regular practice. But as you do it and you get really practiced, you get better and better at it, to the point where you can literally have what we refer to as a bilocation experience, where you're actually kind of in two places at once. You're experiencing the target, even if it's a target 200 years ago in the past. You're experiencing it as if you were there, and it feels like you're there. You can smell the smells and feel the temperatures and the breezes and everything. I mean, it's just really profound experience. So that's what it eventually can lead to for people who put in the time and discipline to practice. And so Lynn always says, watch out, folks, he's going to say the P word, practice, practice, practice.
And that's what a lot of people don't have time for. Society is so busy these days with everything that is going on. Is that why remote viewing really hasn't taken off as something that everybody could and possibly should be doing?
Well, I think so, because when I look back, I'm amazed that I ever stuck with it as long as I did. Because when I learned about remote viewing, I've got to tell you, the day that I learned about remote viewing, I am the mother of 7 children. So in my house, I had my 7 kids. The youngest was like 5, I think. The oldest was 19. She was married and living with her husband in our house with her baby. And so I had those kids. Plus, I had my husband, his mother, and his sister and her husband and their 4 children. We were all living in this big house with 7 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. It was a great big house, but we were all living there. Plus, I was running a refugee program that was keeping me busy night and day. I got phone calls in the middle of the night from the police or from people needing an interpreter at the hospital. I had a big staff. I was writing grants. I was flying around teaching classes on actually I taught all over the United States, grant writing and all these different things. And so my life was chaos 24/7, and now I'm going to add remote viewing into the juggling mix. How is that going to work? I was already so busy I couldn't even breathe, and now I was adding controlled remote viewing. So whenever anybody tells me I don't have time for this, I'm like, listen to my life when I learned it. And so listen to what I was doing. And my husband's job kept him away all the time, so he was never there to help, and I was always kind of the glue that kept everything running. And so I was super, super busy. But what I would do is I would always keep a practice target. I had my husband make up a bunch of practice targets and envelopes for me. And every day I made sure I had a target, a clipboard, and some paper and a pen with me, no matter what I was doing. So if I had to wait at the dentist's office, I was remote viewing. I would remote view on walks. I would take the kids to the park, and I would remote view. I would remote view on airplanes. I remote viewed in airports and bus stations. I mean, literally any time I had a spare moment, I was practicing. And so sometimes I would have to practice for 10 minutes and then write down break and put my time and then resume in time. Every time I started, I would stop and start and stop and start. And it was difficult. It was definitely difficult. And I learned to remote view under any kind of circumstances, in any environment. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pam Coronado, but Pam Coronado is a really well-known psychic detective, and she's had several of her own TV shows, and she's worked with the FBI on real famous high-profile cases and things. And she has taken basic, intermediate, and advanced CRV twice. And so I said, Pam, why are you studying with me when you were already famous before you were already naturally talented and famous, and now you've come and you've taken my courses twice. And she said, CRV has improved my psychic ability 400%, and it's taught me that I can do this anywhere, under any circumstances. I don't have to have the perfect conditions. I don't have to have meditated first, and I can just do this. It's like really practical brass tacks, easy, it's like follow the instructions. There's just simple way to do it. People think you have to be naturally gifted and I have to go meditate and om and, get myself into a higher state of consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. And no, that's not the way CRV works at all. They wanted to build something that they could take a grunt soldier off the front lines and teach him how to be intuitive, teach him to use his intuition, his natural, rather than teach him how to be intuitive, teach him how to access his intuition that he already had naturally and how to control it and use it.
So when you started picking up this gift of remote viewing yourself, do you call it a gift or do you call it true research? Let's get the definition of that first.
Yeah, I don't call it a gift. I feel like gifted people learn remote viewing, and then some people maybe not as gifted still learn remote viewing and do it well. So I don't call it a gift any more than you would call karate a gift. You know what I mean? Is karate a gift? No, it's an art. It's a skill that's practiced and honed. And so it really irritates me. I hear some of these old guys that were way back, maybe at Stanford. I love the guys at Stanford, and I know them all, but there's a few of them that will publicly say this can't be learned, and you have whatever ability you have is the best. However good you are is only as good as you're going to get. You'll never improve, and it's all BS because you can totally. I mean, I have students. I had this one guy that I really wondered if I would ever be able to get him to remote view. He actually wasn't my student. He was someone else's student, and someone called me and they said, I can't take him any further. Could you take him on and see if you can help him? And this guy wasn't able to travel to me to study with me. He was taking care of his elderly mom who had dementia, and he was her only caretaker. So it was the first time I ever taught anybody online, and I started mentoring him once a week. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy's like the Jackson Pollock of remote viewing. I mean, he throws words on a page, doesn't know what he's doing. It's just like terrible. But then he would build like 3D models of the target. And I gave him a target of that miracle landing in the Hudson, with Captain Sully. Yes. That was his target. He had no idea what the target was. And his written session was terrible. I mean, it's like I couldn't make sense of it. That's why I called him the Jackson Pollock of remote viewing. But he built the target out of blocks, and he had the whole Hudson River, and he had the plane coming in, but he couldn't describe it on paper. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I taken on? This guy, it's really going to be tough. But he worked with me every week online for 2 years, and he is now, and that was many years ago, and he is now truly the most dependable remote viewer I have. He is amazing. We did an archaeological project in which he literally gave the archaeologists the GPS location of where they would find these artifacts in the ocean, underwater, and having no idea what he was describing. I gave him a blank map, and he literally pinpointed exactly where they would find it, and they followed those GPS coordinates, and boom, found everything. And so he is literally the most dependable remote viewer I have of all the remote viewers that I've taught. So that proved to me that you could take anybody, and if this guy could learn it, anybody can learn it. Really, I mean, truly. And so, anyway, that was in response to your question. Now I've forgotten what the question was.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. We'll move on here. Mario wants to know if you could discuss the steps involved in remote viewing. How do you do it?
Sure. Now, of course, Mario, you have to understand that most of my students come and they'll study with me for 3 days, and I now teach online as well, but they'll literally study for a 3-day weekend from like 9 to 5, and it's really tons of information. I mean, every day they leave feeling like their brains are going to explode because it's busting open new paradigms, and it's just like mind-blowing. So, of course, on a radio show, I can't explain it all, and teach how to remote view in one radio show, but I can definitely give you a bird's eye view, a really quick bird's eye view. So what we do first, because we understand that the body is the link, what you do first is you sit down with your paper and you want to kind of clear away any garbage that's going to get in your way. So I teach my students a thing called the set-aside process, where they learn to set aside anything that's bothering them. One day, Lynn Buchanan was in the military unit, and he was in the middle of a big remote viewing project. and he gets a phone call from his mother that his father's been in an accident and is dying, and he's got to get to San Antonio fast. And he's at Fort Meade, right, in Maryland. And so he jumps up, and his commanding officer says, "Hey, buddy, you're a soldier. You sit down and finish your project." Can you imagine how hard that would be if you knew your dad was dying and you needed to get there fast and you had to sit down and finish your remote viewing project? So the set-aside process that they developed is like this amazing process that my students have taught to their children, and they've improved their grades. And I mean, just it's this really, really great process. It's a 3-step process to set aside anything that's bothering you. Once you've done that and you've gone through this little admin process that we do, then you're ready to get started. And when you're ready to get started, we give you a series of numbers that we call coordinates. And if you think of coordinates kind of as the address of the target in space-time, you're going to write these coordinates down. And the coordinates really are kind of serve as like databasing fields. They can tell a project manager who's doing the target, what the target's about, and when it was assigned, for example. But those numbers mean nothing to the viewer. They just get this random numbers that they write down. And it helps to have their pen on the paper writing, because then they're going to do what we call an ideogram. An ideogram is just a scribble. They let their pens do a big scribble. And the scribble is something that we formulate beforehand. We'll say, okay, like right now, I'm talking to you, Dave, and I'm talking to you, Mario, right? So if you guys had a piece of paper in front of you right now, and I asked you to write down 7 words: land, water, man-made, biological, space, air, motion, energy, and natural. Those are 7 different words. You would write those things down, and then I would ask you to go to each one of those things and do a quick, easy symbol of those things. Like for land, a lot of people make a little straight line. For water, maybe a wavy line. For man-made, maybe a right angle. So you get the idea. Simple, real simple symbols to illustrate those ideas. But those words are not just specific things. Like what does man-made mean? It means anything that is not natural, that it was made by man. And so a right angle kind of symbolizes that. But it's the idea of something man-made. Or water, we don't mean necessarily water, but it could be water in all of its forms, like ice, snow, steam. Water comes in lots of forms, right? So it's almost liquid. And so the wavy line we call these things gestalts. The wavy line is the ideogram. The word water is a gestalt because it's the idea of the wateriness of something at the target. So these words all symbolize kind of overall concepts that might exist at the target. And what you're doing is you're creating these symbols, and you're memorizing the symbols really well. You practice them so that they become automatic, like riding a bike is automatic, like driving your car is automatic, making these symbols is automatic. And once those symbols are totally automatic, then you can really quickly write your coordinate and do a quick squiggle and go, oh, that looks like my symbol of man-made over water, or land connected to water, or man-made in motion. You come up with these gestaltic ideas. And actually, on my website at http://intuitivespecialist.com, there is a free class all about ideograms. It's really the first part of the basic CRV class, and it's up there for free. You just can go and access it. You don't have to put in your name or anything. You can just access it. It's under free stuff on my website. And you can practice ideograms. You can read all about ideograms. You can look at a PowerPoint that explains everything I'm talking about right now. And it's literally like day 1 of my CRV class, explaining about ideograms. So ideograms and the gestalts become the foundation of your remote viewing session, because you can see how if you could get some gestaltic idea about a target. Well, I don't know what's at this target, but I know there's some land there, and there's some water there, and there's some man-made structures, and it seems like there's something living or that has had life there, some biological things. Then you can actually move to each one of those things. I think I'm going to move to the land and describe it. I'm going to move to the water and describe it. I'm going to move to the man-made and describe it. So you start moving around at the target. And at some point while you're doing this, you're writing down descriptors. And whenever a noun pops in, what are nouns? Nouns are boxes in which we hide things. They're things that hide a bunch of information. If I tell the police that the missing child's under a bridge, they're like, thanks, lady, there's 100 bridges in this city. right? But if I say the missing child's under something that's arched and gray, that has these protruding parts that are sticking up here, and then it has these cylindrical things on the top with flapping, colorful things along it, and and I'm really giving a description, then they go, oh my gosh, that's the bridge at Washington Street. You know what I mean? They can tell from my description what I'm talking about. But if I just say the missing child's under a bridge, that's not helpful at all. So what we do is we have people set aside the nouns. An example for Dave, what if I said, Dave, I have something I want you to describe. It's in this envelope, and you said, I think it's red, smooth, and shiny. I bet it's an apple. And then you pull the picture out, and it's a fire engine, which is also red, smooth, and shiny. So that's why we say, we have a mantra, describe, don't identify. If you stick to describing, you'll be good. Every time you come up with a noun, you just set it aside to the right side of the paper. And so this is all the beginning stages of the CRE process. Of course, there's a lot of stages to it, but the beginning stages, this is what I'm explaining right now. So you've got your gestalt, and you've gone into each gestalt, and you've described it, and then you have an experience where
Absolutely.
all of a sudden you feel like this tall thing you've been describing is looming over you. It's so much taller than I am. And
Lori?
once you have a... Yes.
I'm going to cut you off right there because we are going to be seconds away from going to our first break of the night. We will continue that question on how to become a remote viewer, what you should be looking for. Lori Williams is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. Wow. Quick hour. Very quick hour indeed. Her website, intuitivespecialist.com. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll see you on the other side of the break. Coming September 29th to October 1st, the first annual Spaced Out Radio Caribou Paracon. Hi, this is Dave Scott. The event will be held at the Spruce Hills Spa and Resort in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Come join us for an amazing weekend of speakers talking all things paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Sasquatch, intuitiveness. Listen to great speakers like Miriam Delicato, Samantha Mowat, and the crypto guru Ronald Murphy. Get your VIP passes by going to spacedoutradio.com and clicking on the Paracon banner. Come to BC, where the paranormal is waiting for you.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest. From Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up, enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, John Tenney will be back. John joins us every second month. The Paranormal Weirdo will be back with us 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. Great to have you along for the ride as well. We are live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club, Tauromorphous. Tauromorphous is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, space travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night, right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can be like Andrew and Jeff and Deb and John, and use hashtag Spaced Out Radio to connect with me live during the show. You can give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Find me on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. We're also on iHeartRadio in the United States. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including our Spaced Out Radio store, where you can get some cool swag. Join the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. Check out Contact TV, UFO Seekers, and Bumblefoot, and so much more. We want to see you check it out. So do that today. Well, not during the show, but sometime. Unless you open up a split screen. That works too. Tonight we are talking remote viewing with one of the best in the class of controlled remote viewing. Lori Williams is with us. Her website is intuitivespecialist.com. She's also a #1 bestseller on the New York Times list. Lori, welcome back.
Thank you. How did I get to be a #1 bestseller on the
I read that. Are you telling me the internet isn't true?
I have #1 best-selling students, celebrities,
okay. There
CEOs
it is. I read it wrong.
Corporations among my students.
You know, time out a second. You could have remote viewed that in order to catch me before I did that.
Well, what if you are prophesying, because my book is coming out soon. I actually have a book coming out really shortly on monitoring, but those are more for people who are already into remote viewing. But I also have a book coming out that's going to teach the entire first course, the entire 3-day course. It's going to teach it in a book. It's called Limitless, Your How-To Guide to Practical Remote Viewing. So everybody can stay tuned for that. It will come out soon.
Well, maybe we just did. We just made, we're going to call that a prediction. How about that?
Yeah.
We'll call it a prediction. So there you go.
My bets are on you, Dave.
All right, sure. Make sure that I take the fall if it doesn't happen. Oh yeah, I need that stress. I need that stress. Right before the break, Lori, you were describing how someone can remote view. If you can, if you could remember where you were, we'd love it if you continue that.
Well, where I was talking about how after you've described these different things that you've found, land, water, man-made, whatever, then something happens where you suddenly have a sense that you're describing something and you're there. It's like a perception that includes both you and the target. It's often a spatial relationship, like it's in front of me, it's behind me, it's taller than me. And those kinds of perceptions are called the aesthetic impact. It's when you really connect with the target in a much deeper way. And so when that happens, those aesthetic impacts will eventually be the things that can lead to like a bilocation experience or perfect sight immersion, as they call it. So it's a real exciting thing when that happens. A lot of times in the beginning, students will be having those aesthetic impacts and not even realize they're happening, or they'll have one that's so strong it like almost bowls you out of your chair. The strongest one that I remember when I had my very first really strong aesthetic impact, I was with my kids at the park doing a session, and suddenly, I was describing all these sounds and oompa oompa and people walking in unison and a kind of a competitive but yet a team effort, and I was describing all this stuff, and suddenly I perceived this thing that was like a fluted flower, but it felt metallic and it was kind of golden, and I suddenly felt as if I swooped down it like I was being flushed down a toilet that looked like a fluted golden flower. And it was this really strange sensation. When I later pulled the feedback out, the photograph that I had been viewing, and I had no idea what I had been viewing, it was a brass marching band, and I realized that I had slid down the tuba. And I thought, wow, just think of that. How many people can say they've slid down a tuba? I was so excited. This was in my early days when I was first doing, really basic target practice, and so it was really fun. So that was an aesthetic impact. Aesthetic impact can really be really impactful, very, very powerful. So that at that point, when you have an aesthetic impact in your session, that's like the turning point of every session. I'm sure everybody that's listening has seen a show, for example, like the television show Medium. You know, somebody would hand her, for example, the pen of the murder victim, and she would just like freak out and kind of throw the pen across the room or whatever. That's kind of a really strong aesthetic impact that happens before someone has gained a lot of information about the target. So rather than having aesthetic impacts right the minute you start, usually it's happening after you've gotten some good information about the target. And by the time you have that aesthetic impact, you're ready for it. And when that happens, then you can really dive deep into the target and really get lots of great descriptions. And so that's kind of just a toe dip into what I start teaching, like the first 2 days of the very basic CRV class. It's just kind of a quick glance at that. Then as you get into intermediate levels, advanced levels, we get into the point in the advanced class where we're teaching people how to move along timelines, how to move through time at the target, go forward in time, go backward in time, how to measure things so that if you needed to know, the police need to know how tall the robber was, for example, we give you tools to be able to do that in the advanced class, and how to even build three-dimensional models of the target. So that's, you go from very basic to some pretty amazing detail.
I got a couple questions from the audience here, but first I want to mention this. Good friend of this show, Eric Cooper, he runs a paranormal team in Washington State called Forest Moon Paranormal, and they're not your average paranormal team. They are considered almost like a rescue squad. And what they will do is they will send in a team of remote viewers anywhere in the world to take care of paranormal/extraterrestrial activity that is bothering a lot of people. I have had them perform at my house and a few of my friends' houses to help cleanse and clean things up with unbelievable accuracy. Do you believe that remote viewing is that powerful that it can overcome anything on a spiritual or extraterrestrial side, if done correctly?
I believe if done correctly, yes. We have, for example, a healing course that we teach. There's a lot of facets to controlled remote viewing. And in a way, I look at it almost like a Swiss Army knife. I was just talking to somebody the other day about how it's like a Swiss Army knife. So if you have, a Swiss Army knife is going to be used very differently depending on who's using it. An archaeologist would use it differently, for example, than a policeman might. You know what I mean? And so there's all these different people out there that have a reason to want to learn this, whether they're corporate people that are looking to do better strategic planning for the future, whether they're police that are trying to solve crimes, or doctors who are trying to get an elusive diagnosis, or, you see what I'm going with this? And then when you told me about your friends, I thought that is very cool, because here you have a team who can remotely go in and get rid of, unwanted paranormal activity in a home, or communicate with extraterrestrials. I think that it's really, for example, your friend, Connie Willis, your friend and mine, I know you know Connie.
Yes, I do.
And Connie Willis took my course, I think, back in 2006. She started studying with me, and she studied with Lynn Buchanan, and she has that show Blue Rock Talk, and she's also a guest host on Coast to Coast. And so she and I have been doing something really interesting. She likes to assign targets to me. I have no idea what they are. And then I'll do the target. I'll do a remote viewing session on it, and then I go and I share my results on the air. And then after I've shared my results and put myself out there, then they tell me what the target is. So it's kind of like the king of all dog and pony show. But it's kind of fun. I enjoy it. And so one of the targets she gave me was Bigfoot. And it's so funny because I never thought about Bigfoot. It's just never been anything I was ever interested in. And here I do this whole series of sessions on Bigfoot, and I end up having this amazing communication with Bigfoot, like an stream of consciousness that was so outstanding. And then she had me look at what was under Mount Shasta. She had me examine the pineal gland and its function, and all these things, that I'm blind to. I wasn't told what I was doing. It was just, so is really, really a fascinating thing, and she's a lot of fun. But something you just said made me think of her, and because you were talking about your friends going in remotely to get rid of unwanted paranormal activity. And so that's the thing, is that you can do so many things depending on what your purpose is, And so one of the things that my company loves to do is help people use it and know how to use it in a way that will help them in their lives, for whatever it is. Whether it's making better decisions, knowing where you need to move or where you need to go, or whatever your career is, when you're trying to find answers. And so I think it's so cool, the use that these people in Washington, that your friend has come up with. And and to answer your question, I do believe that in the right hands, used the proper way, it's an extremely powerful tool.
You know what? I'm going to get you in touch with Eric Cooper after this. I'll send you his information, because I think you and him, and Eric doesn't remote view. He just has his team go in and do it. And the job that they do is phenomenal. I had some negative energy at my house, and he sent in his remote viewer, Tony, and I had to laugh, because when I talked to Tony about the results, he goes, "Dave, I'm coming up to your house." And he goes, "Your house is like a Kmart blue light special of the weird and paranormal." He goes, "You got Sasquatch in your backyard. You got fairies all over your yard, gnomes." And I hate gnomes, trust me. Now, just because I said the word accidentally, I'm going to get hit on our chat rooms and Twitter with gnome pictures everywhere. It's going to drive me nuts now. And I've just ruined the show for myself because of that. But he's like, there's ghosts everywhere. There's extraterrestrials. And so Tony comes into my house, opens the front door, introduces himself to whoever is there, and he gets stopped at my door by a fire elemental. Fire elemental says to him, "You can't come in here. You're not allowed." And Tony says, "I have permission from the owner, Dave." And the fire elemental didn't believe him. So Tony respected him, turned his way out. So that night, I had to go and have a message in my room by my fireplace where the elemental hangs out, because he's very protective of my house. And I had to have a conversation with him and say, "Let Tony come in, please." Next morning, he tries again, about 6 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. And the fire elemental just let him come on in. And he cleared out the negative energy, and my house has been great since. And that happened in March or April.
Now, that is really interesting. Now, a story like that, for a lot of the guys that started the remote viewing thing, with these guys that were in the military, Lynn Buchanan, Joe McMonagle, Mel Riley, Paul Smith, a lot of these people that were in the unit that you see portrayed humorously in Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney. A lot of these guys would say, "Oh, well, that is non-provable." They would completely laugh that off because it's non-provable. And what they would do is they would be very irritated just because they've tried so hard. They spent their careers on this, and they want to bring credibility to it. And a lot of people would be like, "What? What's a fire elemental?" You know what I mean? Just be like, "What are you talking about?" And so what we do to kind of counter that is we make sure that our students always learn and practice with hard targets, what we call hard targets. And by hard, I don't mean difficult. I mean concrete. So, for example, to have someone view a fire elemental, for example, wouldn't be concrete because you can't prove a fire elemental exists. You can't show a photo of it. Like, I see the fire elemental and he's bright orange. You don't have a photo of a fire elemental to prove it, right? So what we try to do is we try to make sure that every target we give our students is what we call a hard target, a provable target with a photograph. And that way they can actually database their results. So that, because you mentioned that your friends in Washington have really high percentage of results, like 98%. And you remember I asked you, what are they basing their success rate on? And you said, getting rid of paranormal activity. And so what we do with our students is if they they have a track record with provable targets. So, like, let's say you're a brand new student and your target is a red car, a red Mustang, and you describe the red Mustang really, really well, then let's say you have 50 descriptors about that Mustang, I can actually score those 50 descriptors based on the photograph of the Mustang, based on colors, textures, temperatures, smells, sounds, tastes, really concretely. And then after you've done 50 or 100 targets, you have an actual track record of accuracy in all those different areas: colors, textures, temperatures, smells, sounds, tastes, concepts, positions, patterns, measures, all these things. And I can say, well, Dave is like awesome with colors. He's got like an 89% accuracy rate with colors. And we know that that's proven because it's proven with provable targets. Then later, if you get into your friend's group in Washington and you start working with the paranormal and that sort of thing, we already know what your strengths are because we've gotten them on provable targets. And so targets that are non-provable we call esoteric targets. And so your friends that are having great success, and you know they're having success because the problems that existed prior to their working on your house no longer exist, I'm assuming, right?
Absolutely not.
Right. So that's how you know they're being successful. And in that way, that's the proof that you have. You know what I mean? So in order to know that we're really using the very best viewers, we really train them and run them through boot camp with provable targets so that then we can move them on to looking at planets or extraterrestrials or things like that. If we need to, we can do that and know what their track record is and where their strengths lie. So if we have John Doe who has a 97% accuracy rate in colors, and he says that this planet out in the galaxy of Xerxes is purple, we know with 97% surety that it is purple because he said it's purple and he's got this really high track record of accuracy. And the reason I'm sharing this is just because I want people to know that, a lot of times skeptics like to listen to these shows just so they can laugh and have a good time, right? And so what I like them to understand is that we really try to make this very concrete and very provable and very databaseable. And then later, if we do use it on something where we might not get feedback right away, at least we do use viewers that we have proven track records with, so that the information that those viewers are getting, we can pretty much guarantee that with at least up to a certain point, they're going to be accurate in those areas.
Questions from our audience here. Canadian Joe is asking at #SpacedOutRadio, are there some past events or historical figures that shouldn't be remote viewed?
That is a really great question. And one of the reasons it's such a great question is because let's take Mother Teresa or Abraham Lincoln, people that we admire, people that we know did really good things throughout their lives. Every single person, like Abraham Lincoln, for example, had bipolar disorder, and so he had some pretty dark areas. There were times when he was really depressed, and he also had a form of like Marfan syndrome, I believe, that caused him to be very angular, very tall, long-legged, long arms. And so when you get into the layers of a person, any person, Mother Teresa, Jesus, when you get into the layers of personalities and things, humans are so multifaceted. And how you and I were talking earlier about we don't know what reality is? Another thing that we don't know about humans is how many, not only are we multifaceted, but in how many dimensions are we existing at once? Or, what are we finding in ourselves or in the person that we're trying to remote view? I had an experience once to refer to this question. What did you say Joe is asking? Canadian Joe?
Yes.
So, to Canadian Joe, I had this experience once. I was working on a kidnapping case, and this man had been kidnapped in a foreign country. And so I was remote viewing it, and we do multiple sessions on one case because the more sessions you do on a certain target, the easier that target becomes to view. It's like you become familiar with the target and you're wearing a memory path to the target. So each time you view it, it becomes easier and easier. And so I'd done multiple viewings on this kidnapping situation. And I wasn't the only person working on it. Some other top-notch people were working on it. And I happened to come upon a subterranean area where a number of kidnapped victims were being held, including the one that I was working on. And I saw that there were guards guarding these prisoners, and I communicated with one of the guards. And as I linked with one of the guards through a tool that we teach in the intermediate class, as I linked mentally with this guard on the subconscious level, he told me the name of the organization that had done the kidnapping. And I wrote it down because names are, anything that's a noun is kind of, suspect. But I wrote it down, and it was in a foreign language, and I wrote it all down. And later, just as a side note, later it turned out that group, they had never heard of the group. They researched it. Turned out the group did exist by that name, and they existed exactly where this person was kidnapped. So anyway, but as I was communicating with this guard, Joe, what I found was that as he was explaining to me the ideology of this organization that was doing this kidnapping and why they were kidnapping people, I suddenly felt like I was sympathizing with them. And I actually looked up at my husband, who was monitoring me, because monitors can be very important in a remote viewing session. I looked up at him and I said, I think maybe we're on the wrong side of this thing. And he looked at me and said, does somebody need to detox? And detoxing is a really great tool to have when you link with someone, because literally, Lynn Buchanan was linking because he was forced to. This was his job. He was linking with people like Saddam Hussein and Idi Amin and Muammar Gaddafi. And so as he was doing all these linkings, mental linkings, literally he would suddenly understand from from Saddam Hussein's point of view why genocide was necessary, for example. You know what I mean? So you can suddenly, you're looking through the eyes and the mind of another person, and you suddenly can totally, it's almost like you become them briefly, and you understand their ideology, and it can totally trip you off. So in answer to Joe's question, anybody that looks at another person, and it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's present time or in the past or Hitler or, it doesn't matter who it is, that can be a really tricky situation. So when we teach our students, we try to really teach them a lot about detoxing and staying safe in any target that they're viewing. Because there are some students, I would guess that it's maybe 1 out of 100 students who have a natural ability, a natural tendency to just get sucked right into someone else's mind. As soon as they find another person, they find people really interesting, so they just go, and suddenly there they are, really identifying with this person. And if the person's extremely depressed or psychotic or, things like that, you can get yourself into trouble. And so it's not necessarily that there are certain people that shouldn't be viewed. It's that any person could be a dangerous thing to view depending on what part of that person's mind you're accessing, where you're going, where you're going with your viewing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Let's continue on with our audience questions here, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Milo is asking, is it easy to view everyday mundane things like where are my car keys, is my spouse lying to me about where they are, etc.?
No. Those are some of the more difficult things to view, really. It's easy to view things like, nuclear bombings or crimes or, things that are really exciting. It's really tough to view stuff for yourself because you are emotionally attached to the issue. Like if I've lost my car keys, I'm upset. And so it's like, dang, I've been looking everywhere for them. Where are they? And to sit down and try to do a session and kind of detach myself from my upsetness so that I can actually access that information can be really tough. And so we have techniques to get around that emotional involvement, like what is this boy like that my daughter is dating? Those kinds of questions can be really wrought with emotional attachments. So one way to get around them is to have friends that are really good remote viewers and trade stuff. Like I'll do your session, I'll do a session for you if you do a session for me. Another way to get around it is to and maybe, the Eiffel Tower, whatever, make a series of stuff in envelopes and then randomly pick them. And that way you don't know that you're looking for your car keys when you're working on a certain target because you've kind of blinded yourself to it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Let's continue on here. Eric is asking, what's the weirdest site you've ever remote viewed?
Oh, Eric, that's a hard one. How do I choose? Actually, if you go to the blog on my website, you can see it, where I have a blog called 18 Years of Excitement. It's actually now been 21 years, but 18 Years of Excitement, and I have like some of the most interesting remote viewing things that I did up till then. But I viewed Mars a few times and found that to be extremely different. I've viewed it in the past when there were active civilizations living there. I viewed the destruction of a lot of stuff on Mars. I've seen these obelisks that communicate with beings in a far distant galaxy. I've gotten involved with some interdimensional beings, and just some of the targets that I viewed have been pretty crazy. I've also viewed the dark side of the moon over a period of like 10 years. 3 different people have assigned me with the dark side of the moon for different motives, and each time I've run into the same mining operations and unusual beings up there on the dark side of the moon. So I know there's something going on up there more than meets the eye. So I'm just kind of randomly picking some of the different targets that I've seen that are some of the more unusual ones. But anyway, so yeah, these off-planet ones tend to be quite unusual. Go ahead.
I have to make a correction because Eric Cooper's Forest Moon Paranormal, they're an astral team, not a remote viewing team. So I do have to make that correction.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know. Yes, and people ask a lot of times, Dave, what's the difference between out-of-body or astral experiences and remote viewing? That's a really common question, really. And the difference is that when you are leaving your body and your astral body is traveling around, it's really kind of a part of you, a physical part of you is left. I mean, that's your astral body, and there's some tangibleness to that body. They've actually even had people on a scale when they died, and they became lighter when their astral body left. And so when you're remote viewing, no part of you leaves your body. You are very much intact in your body. In fact, I encourage my students to keep their eyes open, keep talking, keep writing as they're doing this. So it's very, so the conscious mind and the subconscious mind both have a role to play. Whereas with astral projection, your conscious mind is off, is not part of it at all. Your subconscious is completely in control throughout the whole process. In CRV, the conscious and subconscious mind are kind of playing a tennis game. They both have jobs to do. It's like, actually, you're a journalist and you'll understand this. It's actually like the conscious mind acts as the reporter, and he's asking all the questions, and the subconscious mind is responding and giving all the information. So they work together as a team, so to speak. So it's very different from astral travel.
Well, let's move on here. Robert down in Australia is asking, if 2 remote viewers are in the same location, would they be aware of each other?
That really depends on the talent and the abilities of the remote viewers in question. If you ever get a chance to read Lynn Buchanan's book, The Seventh Sense, he tells the story of when he was assigned by the military to view a certain, I think it was a Russian target. And he got there, and he said, as he was describing the target, he said, there's another remote viewer here. And they said, who's this other remote viewer? He said, it's a Chinese remote viewer. And they said, okay, follow that remote viewer back to where they're going. Change targets. You're no longer viewing that target. Now your target is this Chinese remote viewer. And so he actually ended up following the Chinese remote viewer back to their place and kind of followed the Chinese remote viewer. And so, Robert, that right there would tell you that, yes, that's possible, for sure, depending on the abilities and talents of the remote viewers involved. The goal, though, with the military was that they would be undetectable. And so when they were asked a question like Robert's question, they would respond with something like, not if you're doing it right. If you're doing it right, you should be undetectable. That's the goal. So I don't know if Lynn was detected by the Chinese remote viewer, but the Chinese remote viewer was definitely detected by Lynn. So, and she was female as well. Interesting. Just a side note.
The government spies that go on. Gloria wants to know, when you remote viewed under Mount Shasta, what was there?
Actually, Gloria, the results of that whole session is available on my website, and it's right there on the homepage. You'll see a link to it where it says, "Hey, Connie Willis interviewed me, and here's the results of my sessions from coast to coast." They're also available on the Coast to Coast website if there's any coasties listening. But yeah, what I found though there's some kind of definite underground subterranean operation going there, like a facility. I saw shiny white hallways. They seem to radiate out from a central hub, like spokes of a wheel. And there seemed to be a lot of experimentation going on there. There were also man-made spatial-type vehicles that were traveling to and from Mount Shasta. And it's interesting because I had no idea that I was viewing Mount Shasta. But I did find myself, when I was up in the air, I was definitely in a mountainous area, and I compared it to the Swiss Alps. I told my husband, I'm in this really snowy, cold, mountainous area that's like the Swiss Alps. And then when he asked me to go underneath. When I went underneath, I found all these subterranean operations, with long hallways, clinical rooms, experimentation being conducted, and things. So you can read all the details, though, because it is there available on my website.
Let's get to a question that I have here. What do you get out of remote viewing? What is the purpose of it for you?
Remote viewing makes me limitless. That's what I love about it. Truly, when you have the ability to see anything in all of space and time, it's quite exciting. I mean, it's really, really exciting, and it's not just exciting, but it's also comforting to know that you can get answers. I was having a pain in my side for a really long time, and it was really bothering me. And I have a son who is an amazingly gifted medical person. And so finally, one night in the middle of the night, the pain woke me up, and I just said, okay, I've got to remote view this. And so now the goal to all the structure that I teach is that eventually you can actually do it you can actually do it like instantly. So when I said I need to remote view this, I kind of dove down and went and looked right at it. And what I saw was these white kind of thick cord-like things that were woven together like those pot holders we used to make when we were in school and as a kid, those stretchy bands. It looked like it was a white woven pot holder type thing surrounded by red. And so I called my son, who has been, exposed to remote viewing his whole life practically, and said, hey, I have this pain in my side, and I remote viewed it last night, and this is what it looked like, and I described it to him. And he said, oh, that is the scar tissue that's building up from your gallbladder operation. And because you have this autoimmune disease, I have celiac disease, so he's like, you tend to build up more scar tissue than most people, so I just recommend that you sleep on your other side. So that took care of it. But anyway, so it can be useful. It's like having the Swiss Army knife of all Swiss Army knives, where you have a tool that you can use for anything. So it's really awesome. That's why I think after 20-something years, I'm still so passionate about it. And also, it's a wonderful way to get to know yourself and befriend yourself in ways that you never even imagined. You can really, I really encourage my students to do what I call post-session analysis, so that after they do a session, they can really analyze what they got, and they can go, oh my gosh, I totally understand this or that. Because not only are you looking at the target, but sometimes your subconscious mind likes to play games with you. And it will sometimes, instead of having you view the target, especially when it's a practice thing. Now, your subconscious always seems to know when it's something really serious and this is something really important and a child's life is at stake or something really important is happening. It knows the difference between practice and the real deal, operational remote viewing. But when you're practicing, sometimes your subconscious deviates from whatever the target is because it wants to talk to you about something that needs to get off its chest, like that time that your sister told on you and you got a beating for it. It wasn't your fault, or weird stuff like that, deep stuff from your subconscious. And so that can be a really interesting way to start delving and getting to know yourself as well. So I don't know if I answered your question satisfactorily.
But in the end, and we know a lot of this type of stuff starts with some sort of military research. You know, what can be, and I use this term very loosely, what can it be used sinisterly for?
Yes.
You know, and I guess what I'm looking at here when I look at the whole cause and the purpose of remote viewing, it didn't start out just to be something that we could do with our everyday lives to help enhance our own abilities and our own connections. It started off to see, what are the Russians doing? How can we figure out what this is going on? Could you take us through a little history regarding that?
Yeah, for sure. Initially, what was happening was that the U.S. military realized that the Russians were getting a lot of our military secrets, and this was during the Cold War. And they're like, oh my gosh, these guys are getting our military secrets. How are they doing it? And this man defected from Russia and came to the United States with these documents showing that Russia had a psychic spying program. So when this happened, they said, oh gosh, well, they have one. We have to have one. So they went to Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, and they asked them, hey, they said, come on, come up with something. So Russell Targ, who was the inventor of the laser, one of the initial people who invented the laser, and Hal Puthoff, who is currently working on the 0 point, whatever it is. Anyway, all of a sudden my mind's going blank. It's getting late. Anyway, Russ Targ and Hal Puthoff started working on studying telepathy. You know, they brought in Uri Geller, and they were studying all this. And then the U.S. military hired a guy named Ingo Swann, and Ingo had done a lot of psychic work with Princeton University. He's also an artist who has artwork hanging in the Smithsonian. But anyway, so Ingo starts working with Hal and Russell, and Ingo comes up with a set of written protocols to help anybody be able to access their intuition and get really solid information, detailed sketches, things like that. And he figures out how the whole thing works between right brain and left brain, conscious, subconscious, and he comes up with this really great written method. And so once they had this, they were able to start using some guys who were in Fort Meade. So here we have these research think tank guys in California, on the California coast, and then we have the guys who are going to actually use it, the application soldiers in Fort Meade, and they're in this old abandoned building, and nobody's supposed to know they're in there, so they're not allowed to cut the grass. They have to walk through waist-high weeds to get to work. They're not allowed to replace anything. They have to deal with the broken doorknobs and windows and things because it's supposed to look abandoned. This was so top secret. And then these guys in that building are busy finding missing planes and finding hostages in Lebanon and doing all this crazy, really cool remote viewing stuff. And so if anybody ever researches it and says, it never worked and all this stuff, well, eventually when the CIA got it, because every single year these guys would have to prove, they'd have to do a dog and pony show and prove that this worked so that they could get the funding for the next year. And they got funded every year for 20 years. They had to prove it every year, and they got funded every year for 20 years because they proved that it really worked. But then when the CIA decided they didn't want it anymore, they sent in these guys to totally discredit it. And one of the people they sent in, her name was Jessica Utz. They were supposed to go in and discredit the whole thing. Well, when she started reading the file, she said, I can't discredit it. And she wrote up a report, a glowing report, and they actually destroyed her report and published the one they wanted to publish. And so, typically the government doesn't like to, when they decide they don't want something, they can publish whatever they want about it. But the reality is it was a very useful supplement to military intelligence. However, once it was declassified in 1995, 1996, it got declassified. And once it was declassified, these guys who had been doing this for their military careers said, hey, I want to teach this. They were also getting approached like crazy by civilians saying, please teach this to me, teach this to me. And they thought they could only teach one person at a time. It's only been in more recent years that we've started teaching bigger and bigger classes. But anyway, so as they started teaching it, they started realizing there's a lot of great applications that this can be used for. Like I mentioned earlier, elusive military diagnoses or archaeological finds or, just so many different ways that we can use it. And I think of things like, could we use this to discover solutions for the overcrowding problems or pollution problems or the climate change, cold fusion? Let's use this for some really great things that will change the world. That's my passion.
The problem is there's still people out there using it for what it's not supposed to be used for, and that's spying. Let's be honest.
Well, the thing, too, though, is a gun evil? Is a gun dangerous? Yes, depending on who's got it, right? You're always going to have bad people that use things in bad ways. But that doesn't stop us from teaching it to good people who are going to use it in good ways. I have 7 children, and when I was having babies, I was constantly harangued, what, you're so irresponsible, how can you have all these children? And, people, and finally I said, look, in all the developing countries, a lot of them we have a negative population growth. And in underdeveloped countries, we're having families with 15 children, and they're all growing up uneducated, and, there's this imbalance that's starting to happen. So somebody's got to take one for the team and create have babies that are educated and really good people and are going to contribute to society. And thankfully, I love all my kids, and they're all good people, and they're contributing to society. And so that's the thing with CRV as well. I mean, if there are bad people out there using it in a bad way, don't you think we better teach it to some good people so that we can counteract that and have a balance? Don't you think that balance is important?
Balance is important. However, as long as there is alternative theories and methods to this strange world we live in, unfortunately, it's kind of like, the yin and the yang, where you're going to have your good along with your bad, using the same techniques to try and get ahead in this world.
Exactly. So what's the solution? The solution isn't to go hide under a rock. The solution is to actually give the tool to everyone. Give the tool to as many people as can learn it. Because what I truly believe, Dave, is that controlled remote viewing is like a survival skill for the future. We're living in really uncertain times. And here in the States, I know you Canadians watch with horror as we're going through this crazy presidential time right now with, the really amazingly bad stuff is happening right now in our government and with our country. And the American people don't like it and don't want it. The majority of them are fighting it, but nobody's listening, and they're doing what they want. So if things get really bad, I mean, so many of my older friends who were around and very familiar with World War II are saying, right now the United States has become so much like pre-Hitler days. We're just kind of moving in that direction. It's really, really a scary situation. Well, if we are moving into uncertain times, in times where some states are banning the collection of rainwater, or where, in some places where they're threatening to put controls over whether you can grow your own food, or, crazy things like that, then we need to be able to anticipate things. And CRV is a way to anticipate things. I think that we need, just as, there's a big controversy over gun laws and, whether people should be allowed to arm themselves. Our Constitution was built on the ability of people to arm themselves, and yes, we have a lot of gun violence, but I think if you take the arms away, you're freeing up you're freeing up the criminals. The criminals are always going to get guns, and then you've got the innocent people who are no longer allowed to protect themselves. So I look at CRV in the same way. We need to allow the common guy and gal to learn this, because it's a survival skill, and it's a protective measure as well. That's my opinion anyway, for what it's worth.
Do you still see a purpose for an everyday Joe or Jill to be practicing remote viewing? Is this in the best interest for a lot of people?
I believe it is. Because that's the thing, is if you want to look at something as being evil or being dark, then that's what it will be for you. But I really have the vision for this being a really great tool. I mean, I've got like I mentioned earlier, I had a CEO of a major corporation fly from Australia all the way to Amarillo, Texas, to sit at my table and learn this from me. I've had celebrities learn it from me, and New York Times bestselling authors and everyday Joes. And I can tell you, I've seen the gamut, from the most educated, wealthiest person to really ordinary folks, just, with ordinary jobs learning this. And they've all been able to use it in really wonderful ways to enrich their lives. help make better choices and decision-making, help to anticipate things. A lot of my students have used it in their parenting. I used it in my parenting, I can tell you that. I used it a lot to keep track of where my kids were and what they were doing. And my son recently said to me, Mom, growing up with remote viewers, it was so unfair. We couldn't get away with anything. So there's a lot of great ways to use it. And so I don't like to cast it in a real sinister light because I really believe that's totally unnecessary. It's a great way to do practical things.
I can understand that, and trust me, if I were to do parenting all over again, I would probably remote view. I probably would. I think I might be scared on a few things that I see, and maybe not being able to do that. And I do have to say this. On hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter, Jeff Gear just posted a caribou night sky, because I live in the beautiful Caribou here, and apparently there is northern lights out there right now.
Oh, my goodness. Can you see them where you are?
Well, I can tell you right now, in about 5.5 minutes when we go to break, I'm running outside.
Oh, man. I bet that's gorgeous.
Yes, so I got to go check it out, because the last time we had northern lights a couple months, well, we had it 2 weeks ago, but couldn't see a darn thing due to the forest fire smoke that was over the sky. But the last time we did this during the show, they actually enveloped my house in the sky.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of beautiful, I'm not going to lie. It was kind of beautiful. So that's something that I'm definitely going to have to check out here during the break. But we got about 5 minutes left. And like we were talking about, everybody, as you say, can do this. And everybody has the ability. How do you train people to use it for their benefit rather than trying to conjure up something on someone they don't like or have some sort of emotional attachment to?
It's really amazing, Dave. I just think that the universe kind of draws different people to different teachers. There are some teachers out there that I wouldn't recommend that are pretty sinister and dark themselves who attract that kind of person. But I find that my students are just wonderful people. And I do have a student agreement that they sign. And in that, it's a 4-page document, and they have to initial each paragraph. And it talks specifically about that. And they agree never to use it for nefarious purposes, But CRV can be used to improve strategic planning for corporations and companies, assist law enforcement to find missing people and solve crimes, locate artifacts and structures in important archaeological digs, help parents better understand their children and foresee problems before they occur, thereby preventing disaster, work with medical personnel to detect illness and locate the source sometimes before it becomes a really big problem, improve creativity for authors, songwriters, and more. I have so many artistic people who say that CRV has made a huge difference in their art and their writing. Uncovering hidden secrets of history, describing future technologies. We've had some great successes with that. Devising improved strategies and processes for current methods of doing things, and finding solutions to personal, professional, and planetary issues. So, prior to getting involved in CRV, I had a terrible fear of heights. Being up in a building, roller coasters, tree houses, the thought of anything high up just caused my heart to pound and my breathing to seize up. And I didn't make a big deal out of it, but when I started working with Lynn, he immediately noticed that whenever he gave me a remote viewing target that involved heights, I would have a visible reaction, even though I didn't know what I was viewing. And after several episodes of me being unable to view high targets, he finally said, "Are you afraid of heights?" And I responded with a resounding yes. And after that, he made a point to send me targets that had heights involved. So I ended up viewing airplanes in flight and hot air balloons and Cirque du Soleil acrobats in the air and the highest roller coaster in the world and all that kind of stuff. And he would mix those in with packets of non-height related targets. And after several months, I became desensitized to heights. And the real test came when I went to go visit my son, who was stationed at Cape Canaveral in Florida. And it was shortly after 9/11, and Busch Gardens Amusement Park had opened its doors to active military and their families. And Busch Gardens is known for its really huge roller coasters. And the park was almost deserted, so we didn't have to wait in lines or anything. We just rode all day long, these really high roller coasters, and I was the only one who didn't get sick. And since then, I've gone parasailing, 600 feet above the ocean attached to a kite. I've done those sausage burrito things attached to bungee cords where they kind of wrap you up and then they drop you on a bungee cord. I've done all kinds of really scary height-related things that I would be like, never have done before. So it really, CRV can help you get over phobias and fears and get to know yourself in wonderful ways. So I just make sure that in my teaching I emphasize all the wonderful ways that it can be used, and I encourage my students. I also have a mentoring club, so my students mentor with me on a regular basis after taking the course with me. I think I'm the only teacher that offers that kind of follow-up, but they mentor with me weekly, and so we get together, and I give them targets to practice, and we discuss all kinds of things, the spiritual aspects, the ethical aspects of remote viewing. And so I think that, it's kind of like raising a child. I mean, are you going to raise someone to be a good person or a bad person? And I realize that not everyone has that choice, and some kids turn out bad no matter what you do, but generally speaking, it seems like we've had just wonderful successes with our students, and they're wonderful people, and they use it for good all the time. So I haven't had one yet that I know of that's ever used it for a nefarious reason.
We have just under a minute left before we got to go to break. When we come back, Lori, I would love for you to describe how police and doctors could use this technique in order to help out their cold cases or their patients or something along those lines. And I want to see if you've helped out police as well, because I find that very, very intriguing, and I hope you're okay with going in that direction.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about that when we get back.
This is way too much fun. 2 hours done already, Lori. I told you it would be fast.
Thanks, Dave. We'll see you after the break then.
Well, you know what? We will see you after the break, so you hold on. I'm going to mention to our audience here once again, Lori Williams, remote viewing instructor. Her website is intuitivespecialist.com. I would highly suggest that you guys, if you have an interest in remote viewing, that you want to go and you want to check it out, because this is something that could interest all of us. So go check it out. intuitivespecialist.com, once again, is the website. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. Lori's been with us for the first 2 hours. She's brave. She's going the distance. So if you have any questions, I will get to them in hour number 3 as well. Keep them going. I'm going to go outside and see if the Northern Lights are hanging out during the break. Hopefully they are. They're kind of fun to see. Hopefully the cougar isn't around either. I'll be right back. You'll be right back. Spaced Out Radio, 1 hour to go right after this. Looking for a great weekend getaway this fall? Hi there, this is Dave Scott. Come on up to the heart of British Columbia for the first annual Spaced Out Radio Caribou Paracon, being held at the Spruce Hills Spa and Resort in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Speakers from all over North America are coming to discuss Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and intuitiveness for the 3-day event, September 29th to October 1st. For more information, go to spacedoutradio.com and click on the Caribou Paracon banner and book your tickets today. Come to BC, where the paranormal is waiting for you.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4COP. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Wachowski's Strange Days.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories. From alien encounters to the latest conspiracies, you won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
A child grew up too fast, went running wild. Now we don't know who to pray to anymore.
Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you with us tonight. Tomorrow night on the program, John Tenney is back with us, making his bi-monthly appearance on this show. We'll be talking everything paranormal with the man who proclaims himself to be the paranormal weirdo. It's going to be very, very good indeed. I want to give a shout out to my cousin Gary in Edmonton, who I had no idea was a believer in a tinfoil hat wearing guy. Gary, if you're listening, call me tomorrow during the day. You got my number. Appreciate you listening in. Thank you so much, Gary. And if you want to hook up with us on Twitter, go to #SpacedOutRadio. Now, I do want to update all of you on the forest fire situation here. As you know, I am back in my house, about 70 kilometers, 50 miles away from me, about 45 miles away from me. A town called Clinton has just been evacuated due to another forest fire that has erupted. So I don't know. Hopefully that thing does not move north. I really don't want to leave again. I am on evacuation alert here, but it's a little scary to hear that happen once again so close. Because really, if it goes, they're south of me. I can't get back home. Down to the lower mainland where it's safe, and I only got to worry about tidal waves. Nothing like that. But that's okay. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are also live on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We're live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Tauromorphous. Tauromorphous is your password for tonight. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio and at SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Find me on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. We're also on iHeartRadio in the United States. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. You can watch some great television on Contact TV by Leslie Mitchell Clark. You can check out our resident ufologist, Tim Doyle, and UFOseekers.com, and read up on the encounter online. I highly suggest you do that. Go to our store as well. Pick yourself up an SOR t-shirt. Cousin Gary, you need to get a Spaced Out Radio t-shirt. Go to the website and get one. I know you're listening. So, tonight we are talking remote viewing. And Lori Williams is our guest. Her website, intuitivespecialist.com. And she's teaching us all about remote viewing tonight. You know what? We try and get the best here, and I think we got the best. Lori, thank you so much for going the distance with us tonight. That's very, very special indeed.
Oh, gosh, I'm glad to do it. I love talking about CRV, especially to new people who haven't ever heard about it before. I imagine some of your listeners have heard about it, but I bet there's quite a few who are learning things tonight maybe they hadn't ever heard before.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that completely. And I got to tell you, this whole forest fire situation has me a little rattled now. Has me a little rattled because my wife came down and basically said, the town has been evacuated south of us. And, you know, you just don't want to hear that. I'm going to be honest. I'm getting sick of it, Lori. I'm getting sick of the whole forest fire thing. I can't wait. You know, people complain around here about that it gets really cold, and it does. It gets very cold here. And it almost topped minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit last year during the winter. And I'm okay with that if it means things aren't burning. Yeah. I would sooner shovel snow than burn. It just seems safer. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Oh, gosh. I'm so sorry, Dave. That's just a That's really a bummer that that's happening.
Well, you know what? Sometimes Mother Nature needs to cleanse herself.
Yeah.
And you know what? The way I look at it, a forest fire is a necessary evil, except when they're started by man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but sometimes the forests need to cleanse themselves, and let's just hope that everybody gets out of there safe and sound, just like they did. I mean, if they got as much notice as we did when we had to evacuate 2.5 weeks ago, God bless them, because we had enough time to get as much as we could out of our house before we had to split. But I just don't want to leave again. I really don't.
Yeah.
I like my little studio here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll just keep holding that in our thoughts, that you are perfectly safe, you and your wife, and that your house is surrounded by a big circle of light to protect it, angels or something to keep it safe.
Absolutely.
Keep you safe.
Well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed, say our prayers, and everybody out there, let's do a little bit of a mind prayer. If you're in the audience listening, tell that forest fire to stay away from the town. You know, We had people just a couple miles away from me lose their houses. I could never imagine. And thank goodness I live by the fire department, which is cool.
Right. So everybody that's listening, tonight as you end the program, just focus your thoughts on that fire and just imagine it going out. Just imagine it raining on it or something, just making it just go out. Let's put it out with our minds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in the power of the mind that way. Now, before the break, we were talking about police and doctors. We were just getting into that, and I want to focus on police cases here, because there are so many mysteries out there, Lori, where people just want closure as to what happened to a family member or what happened to a loved one who ran away and never to be seen again. How hard is it to work police files, whether they're fresh or whether they're cold cases from 30, 40, 50 years ago?
It's really hard, and I'll tell you why. It's not that the remote viewing is hard or getting the information is hard. It's what it does to the viewer and how difficult it is, because those cases are wrenching emotionally. And so it is tough to do it. For a while there, that was all I was doing, was working police cases. And it just got to where I was just so drained and exhausted, and, you know, it was really too difficult. There was one case of a missing boy, and I was in the middle of remote viewing it, and this kid was in the forest with a friend. They were walking through the forest, and I'm remote viewing the whole thing, and all of a sudden I get this shooting pain that goes from the right back of my head to the left front of my head, just shooting through my head diagonally. And it was this hot, sharp, intense pain. And I just immediately knew that this boy had been shot through the head. But I experienced it as I had been shot through the head. I mean, it was so intense. And so those kinds of things, those kinds of experiences, and that's just, I mean, that's not even the worst of the kinds of experiences you can have, but police cases especially, you know, like people will be like, I want to become a remote viewer so I can help find missing children. And that's a really noble desire. But the thing is, some of those missing children have been murdered and dismembered. And, you know, it's like a horrible, horrible thing to have to experience as a remote viewer. So especially if a remote viewer, you know, I know of a case where a very new remote viewer, this was years before I began teaching, when I was still just learning in a new remote, I'm still just, everybody's learning, but when I was a brand new remote viewer, another brand new remote viewer had gotten involved with a young man who wanted to remote view a serial killer. And so she did this session not knowing she was viewing a serial killer and all this, and she ended up remote viewing and kind of becoming the one of the victims, you know, and so it's not a game, you know, it's something that is really, really serious. Remote viewers, including myself, have been able to give helpful information to the police. We don't solve crimes. We provide additional information, supplemental information that can help the police do their job better. And so that's our goal when we work with the police. When we work on I get requests all the time. I've been doing a lot of radio shows lately, and I get requests from people all the time, please help me find my brother, help me find my sister, these heartbreaking letters. And our hearts just really, really do ache for these people when they've lost a loved one and they don't know where they are. However, we do have a really strict policy that we work only with the police. And the reason for that is because if we work with families, a lot of times the families will go, oh my gosh, I'm working with remote viewers and they know, da-da-da-da-da. And then the police will just get frustrated. They didn't ask for this. They'll throw everything in the garbage. They'll refuse to act on it. They consider that either they think it's BS or they think that that they'll be a laughing stock or whatever. So unsolicited information is usually not welcomed by the police, and hours, days and weeks of work can sometimes end up in a trash can. And then the family feels very hurt and frustrated if that happens. And we don't want the family to get into a vigilante situation where they put themselves in danger because they've decided that if the police aren't going to act on it, they're going to act on it. And they're going to go look for the person themselves, maybe put themselves in harm's way. And so for that reason, we're unable to work directly with families. We have to work through the police department. And so when we get requests from the police, and there are several organizations, police organizations, that use remote viewers on a regular basis. One of those is an organization called FindMe2.com. I think now it's called FindMeGroup.com. Bruce Willis is a big supporter of that group, and I've worked with that group. I worked with them for many years until I got too drained and exhausted to continue. I had to shift gears and start working on other types of targets. But it's a wonderful organization, and that's what they focus on, is finding missing people. So that's kind of where we're at with the police. When you're talking about police and medical people, in both of those genres, you have people whose reputations could be at stake. Like how many doctors want to say, well, I used a remote viewer to help me with this diagnosis. It's not exactly something that a doctor would necessarily want on his resume, because doctors want to appear very competent and that they're able to make their own diagnoses. But there have been many, many times when we've been able to help. In fact, I have a number of doctors who are my students and who've come and taken my courses. And so I've had quite a few, as a matter of fact, and not just medical doctors that are physical doctors. Like I've had an oncologist, hematologist, ophthalmologist, psychiatrists, pediatricians, clinical psychologists among my students. And so they love being able to have that extra tool to help them in their work. And just to tell a quick personal story on a medical thing, I had one of my students who mentioned that his back was bothering him. He had had a number of back surgeries and, had all kinds of rods and bolts and things up his spine. And he said, hey, tomorrow do you think you could do some Reiki on my back? My husband's a Reiki master, and I've taken my husband's courses in Reiki, and so I said, sure, I'd be happy to work on your back. And so that night, not the night, I was going to work on his back the next night, but that night when I went to bed, I was suddenly, as you're drifting off to sleep, I was drifting off to sleep, and I imagined him on the Reiki table. I was just seeing him on the Reiki table, and there was this bar light that was going across, kind of scanning his body. It was a purple fluorescent light, and right when it got over his pelvic area, the light exploded and shocked me and kind of jerked me awake, and I heard the word prostate. Now, this was a young man. He wasn't an old guy. And so the next day when I saw him, I said, hey, you need to go get your prostate checked. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah, go get your prostate checked. So he went and got it checked, and it turned out that he had a precancerous tumor on his prostate. And so, these kinds of experiences, when we do medical work on people, it's really interesting because, especially if we don't have a medical background, all we can do, like I did with my son, explaining to my son that I saw this thing that looked like a white pot holder that was woven. All we can do is describe what we're seeing. We can't identify it. But that's often the best way to go, because sometimes when we jump to conclusions, we jump to the wrong conclusion. And so by just describing it to someone who really does have a background and does know, then, you're giving a description, and that person can easily kind of know what you're talking about. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. But have you ever been approached by police officers or doctors, for that matter, to help with a case or a medical understanding of someone?
Yes, definitely.
Do you feel? do you feel though? And you can only give your best, but do you ever get nervous and think, "Geez, what if I'm wrong?" Especially on the diagnosis of someone on the human body.
Well, you see, the thing about it is, I'm not diagnosing anything. All I do is especially if we're given something, we're usually not told that we're doing a diagnosis. A lot of times when, we have project managers that act as a liaison between the remote viewer and the person who needs information. Let's say it's a doctor. So the doctor needs information. He doesn't talk to the remote viewer directly because what that's going to do is pollute the viewer. For example, if I say to you the word criminal, Dave, what immediately comes to mind? You might think sinister, violent, pockmarked, drug addicted, armed. These words are going to come, male, dirty. You might have these words come to mind. And then it turns out that the criminal is actually the little old lady who's been embezzling from the company for 50 years. You know what I mean? So we all have these associations with certain words that will pollute and bring imagination into it, bring so much pollution into it that we can't even do a session. So the important thing with all CRV sessions is that the viewer remain blind to the target while viewing, and that keeps all that pollution away. So if I'm going to work a medical case, in a medical diagnosis case, I'm probably not going to know I'm doing it. I'm just going to be told that I'm working a remote viewing case. I'm going to be given a number, and then I'm going to just start describing what's coming to me. And then those descriptions then go to the doctor who's educated, and he can look at those descriptions and say, oh my gosh, I know exactly what this problem is now. And so I don't have that pressure of saying, gosh, what if I give a wrong diagnosis, because I don't know I'm doing a diagnosis. Does that make sense? One research project that I worked on was fascinating. It was a research project involving all of a sudden I lost what it was. These bacteria that eat, they're viruses that eat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, macrophages they're called. And so the key was to see if remote viewers could remote view something microscopic and remote view a process, because if they could, then they were thinking this could be used to help when we do run into problems like antibiotic-resistant bacteria that's threatening humanity or whatever. And so I was a viewer on that project, and I remote viewed this microphage thing, not knowing what I was remote viewing. But when I had my aesthetic impact, which I just explained in the last hour, where I really interacted with the target, I suddenly felt as if I was on a roller coaster made of light. I was in pitch darkness, but I was on this roller coaster that was all lit up, and it was twisting. And I suddenly looked up and said to Jim, I think I'm writing a strand of DNA. And it was so amazing. I felt like I was writing a strand of DNA. And then suddenly the strand ended, and I felt like I was just jutted out into the cosmos. And I was really looking at these amazing microscopic things, and I said, oh my gosh, it's microscopic. And I was interacting with these microscopic macrophages. And I ended up writing a report, and I wrote it out into like an Excel spreadsheet, just perception by perception in a column and an outline. And I ended up with, I think it was like 248 descriptions of what was going on. And they gave it to 4 doctors who specialize in macrophages and asked them, who knew nothing about remote viewing, and just said, could you score this for accuracy within macrophage? And they all scored it to have 98% accuracy. And that's without me knowing what I was viewing. So you see what I'm saying? You see how it works? That blindness to the target is what allows us to be able to interact with the target without all the trappings and all the stereotypes and all the worry and all that. So when you're remote viewing that, it can be very exciting, and you just describe what's coming to you. And that's all you have to do, just describe what's coming to you. Just write it down.
Let's get to a question from Robert in Australia. Do you ever use or teach your students to use crystals to enhance their abilities during remote viewing?
No, not at all. CRV is CRV. crystals and stones and things like that are part of another genre of the different types of arts we're talking about. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have students that do use crystals. Many students have different techniques that they like to add to their thing. Like, there's people who want to meditate before they remote view. There's people who contact their spirit guides before they remote view. There's people who don't believe in any of that and just remote view. So, we don't, we kind of leave all that at the door when students come in. Whatever their belief systems are, whether they think they're going to access the Akashic Records or whatever, they leave it at the door and they come in with the beginner's mind and learn how to do CRV. Then, once they've really gotten good at CRV, then if they want to, enhance it in any way that they feel it was good, they can certainly do that. And as my mentor would always say, sure, try it 500 times this way, try it 500 times that way, and then keep data and do whichever one has the best results. So, you could, if you believe that crystals were going to really help and enhance your remote viewing, you could do a bunch of sessions using crystals and do a bunch of sessions without using crystals and see which one had the better result. That would be the scientific way to see if crystals are actually having an effect on the remote viewing. So if I have a student who asks me, hey, Lori, do you think that I should use crystals to enhance my remote viewing? I would give them a view and say, go ahead and try it, but keep data, and then try it without it and keep data, and see which one, which way works better for you. And they might work better with the crystals, especially if they have a strong belief system that crystals enhance psychic ability.
Well, I'm still not as in touch as I should be with the crystals, I don't believe. I know sodalite works for me. The rest of them, I don't know. I'm just not sure. A lot of times I don't get anything. I feel kind of boring. Not going to lie, I feel kind of boring about that, but we'll go with it. Let's get to Eric's question here, and this gets back to the solving crime aspect of everything. And Eric is wondering, Lori, have you ever seen the movie starring Ben Kingsley called Suspect Zero, and how close did it come to the truth of the crime-solving aspect of remote viewing?
I really disliked that movie, to be honest. I didn't like it. I didn't feel that it was a good portrayal of CRV at all. I didn't like they have to make everything so dramatic in order to sell the movie, but it really wasn't at all a good portrayal of the process or the way it works or anything. It was actually a pretty poorly done movie, in my opinion. But so in crime solving, again, we have a viewer who's completely blind to the target. And so, and again, we don't solve crimes, we just supply supplemental information. The way that it works, though, is it's almost like the aperture of a camera. You know how the aperture of a camera opens just like in a split second, opens and closes, just. And the images and words and smells and tastes and sensations come to you quickly and very subtly, just really rapidly. And it's almost like trying to drink from a fire hose. The subconscious mind is so much faster and quicker than the conscious mind. So here the subconscious is just blasting information at you, and you're trying to sip from the fire hose. The conscious mind is lumbering along trying to take little sips, and you're getting little pieces of information. And it's almost like while you're gathering the information, you're using them like Legos and building a virtual reality around yourself. And eventually, if you buy into that reality strong enough, you have a bilocation experience. But it's kind of like the holodeck on the Starship Enterprise. You can really buy into it, and it feels really real. And there are some remote viewers who say, no, it is real. I definitely have been there. I'm there when I'm there. But most remote viewers experience it in a kind of a subtler way. I had one session once where I really had a very strong bilocation. And for a split moment, I was no longer present in the room with the people who were watching me do the session. And of course, to them I was present, but to me I wasn't. I wasn't aware of them for a few minutes. And I was suddenly sitting in a bar, and I could feel the coolness of the counter under my arms. I could see off to my right there were neon beer signs, and I could hear clinking of glasses, and it was kind of dark. And the cigarette smell was so strong in this bar that I just felt like I was going to gag and run out of the room. And then I realized that sitting next to me was a woman with dyed red hair, short dyed, really red hair, and lots of wrinkles, and very thin, and chain smoking and drinking really heavily. And I realized that that was my target person that I was supposed to interview, So, but it was it was really an amazingly strong bilocation experience, one of the strongest ones I've ever had. And anyway, and then all of a sudden I blinked and I was back in the room again, but I hadn't actually ever left. It was more that I had built this virtual reality and suddenly kind of visited it, like the holodeck, if that makes any sense.
Let's get to a question from Tripp here. And he is asking, Lori, have you ever been able to teach a skeptic, and did their mind change?
Oh, my gosh. I have a perfect story for you, Skip. So my husband is a forensic scientist. And one year, it was his responsibility to host and set up the conference for the American forensic scientists that were coming to our hometown, and he had to do the whole thing. And part of it was to have a 2-hour presentation by a local person that had nothing to do with forensics, but that, so like in one town they had like the local broom maker come in and show how they made brooms or, whatever. And so he goes, I don't know who to do this 2-hour presentation. I have to have a local person. And I said, well, why don't you let me present on CRV? He was like, oh my gosh, oh yeah, and so he got real excited. So I was going to present to 70 forensic scientists. And they were mad when they saw the schedule and they saw that I was going to be presenting on controlled remote viewing. They were like, oh, my God, are you kidding me? Are they really going to do this? Are we going to really have to sit through this? I mean, that was their attitude, right? So I walk in this room, and there's these 70 scientists sitting there staring at me with steely, cold eyes, skepticism. And I did a 2-hour thing. But what I did was gave a brief history, and they all had envelopes on their desks that they were instructed they couldn't open, like 9 by 12 envelopes. And I gave a quick history. I gave a quick synopsis of how to do phase 1 and 2 of the remote viewing process. And then I had them all do it. And then I had them open their envelopes. And they all were flabbergasted at what they had done. It's so much more powerful to have a skeptic do it than for you to do a demonstration for a skeptic, because if you do a demo, they'll be like, oh, she's cheating, she tricked me, or, whatever, or maybe she's extra talented, or whatever they think. But when you do it yourself, there's no, you didn't cheat. And so they were flabbergasted. And at the end of the 2 hours, oh my gosh, they literally lined up, and took turns to ask me questions, to show me what they had done, to tell me how shocked they were. And then this one guy walks up and he goes, hi, my name's Max. And I said, oh, nice to meet you, Max. He goes, no, I'm Max. And I said, yes, nice to meet you, Max. He goes, no, you don't understand. I'm your husband's boss's boss's boss. And he goes, and I did it, and it was the most amazing thing. And he was just flipped out over it. So yes, I have often had to teach skeptics. Another group of skeptics that I get these husbands or wives that are only attending my class because they want to see what their spouse is getting into, and they are real skeptical. And they are completely converted. And I had this one couple who came to take the class, and the husband walked in, and he had the stiffest posture I've ever seen. And so he sat through the first day, and years later his wife told me that night he threw up all night long because his paradigm had been so busted. She didn't think he would come to class the next day. But he did come to class, and he ended up doing great. And by the end of the third day, he was completely converted and convinced that this really does work. But he walked in the door a complete skeptic, non-believer, thought it was all BS, but he only came because he was worried about his wife getting into something he didn't want her to get into. Years later, we ran into them on a trip, and not even knowing they lived in that town. I was looking through a real estate magazine, and there was my student. So I called her, and we ended up having lunch with them. And he came walking in, and he was a different person. He was relaxed and happy. And she said, my daughter, after he took the class, my daughter was like, is something wrong with Dad? Is he on drugs? And she said, no, that's called happiness. He just totally transformed and became this really relaxed, happy, wonderful person from a very stiff, formal person that he had been before. So yes, I frequently teach skeptics.
Is there an enjoyment or a satisfaction you get from changing someone's mind?
Oh my gosh. Yes. You know, my husband is like he's just a saint. He's the most patient, wonderful guy. And for years and years, every weekend I'd be teaching, and he would, his weekend would be listening to me teach the same class over and over again. And I said, how do you stand it? And he said, I love watching the students walk in one way, and when they leave on that third day, they're like 5 feet above the ground, floating out the door. He's speaking figuratively, of course, but, just seeing the transformation in people's lives is so rewarding. It's just amazing.
Couple more questions from our audience. Ron is asking, what do you think about the use of pendulums?
Oh, we use pendulums excessively in the phase 6 part of the controlled remote viewing process. And so, yes, pendulums are really, because since this is a process that works through the body, then the subconscious can communicate using the body and cause the pendulum to move. So the CRV method of using a pendulum, we try to keep it as still as possible, because that way any movement that comes through the pendulum is subconscious. Yes, we definitely use pendulums quite a bit.
How do you define their accuracy?
I don't know that I could define their accuracy. It really depends on who's using them. And some people find that they do terrible with pendulums, and they do better with rulers or other forms that we use, that we teach. Hold on just a second. I have to clear my throat. But we find that there's certain people who have always used pendulums who do great with pendulums. I love pendulums and use them frequently. So it just depends. And one of the things about pendulums that can be a problem is if you've got a situation in which you're really emotionally attached to the outcome, and you're asking a yes or no question, and you really want the answer to be yes, let's say, then you can really influence the swing of the pendulum. So it's really good to blind yourself to the question, so that you're going to just you have a number of yes or no questions that you want answers to. You put them all in identical envelopes, keep them unmarked, and then just take an envelope and you don't know what the question is. You're just going to say, give me the answer to this question, and use the pendulum for a yes or no answer. That's just one example, but there's a lot of ways to use a pendulum.
I like the pendulum. I use one myself in order to, gain my own little spiritual guidance, whether it works or not. I have no idea what happens to it, on whether or not I get the right answers or not, but I can tell you this. There have been times where it seems so eerily accurate that it absolutely scares me sometimes, because you don't expect certain answers, and all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And the person who you're with is confirming it.
Yep. That's the thing, is that the subconscious knows, and it can just simply work through your body and cause the pendulum to swing in the right way, So, and the thing is that if you think about it, if a pendulum works, there's a lot of other things that can work as well. For example, you could tell yourself that you could you can put a line on a piece of paper with certain answers on it, and you could say, well, when I pass my hand over the paper, the answer that's the correct answer is going to feel warmer than the other answers. And I use that technique. We call that the hot spot technique, and I use that a lot of times on the fly. I'll just give a quick example. We went into a jewelry store, and we wanted to buy my son a gift for his he was graduating as a nurse practitioner, and he'd worked so hard to get that. And so we wanted to buy him this beautiful, like $500 watch. And so the lady laid out all the watches, and then I was like, I have no idea which one to pick. They were all gorgeous. And the one I was drawn to, I didn't think he would like, but I wasn't sure. So she had them all laid out. There were like 8 of them. And then I just said, okay, I'm going to just pass my hand over these and say the one that he'll like the best is going to feel warmer than the rest. And when I passed my hand over, one of them felt really hot, and I was amazed. So I took photos of them and sent them to his wife and said, which one do you think he'll like? And she chose the one that I had felt that was extra hot. And so I ended up buying that one for him. And then later he looked at the photo and said, oh, you definitely picked the one I like the best. But it's just, and he loves this whole thing. He loves the CRV and everything we do. He just thinks it's very cool. But anyway, so there's all kinds of techniques that you can use on the fly, using your body sensory mechanisms to give you answers that you need very quickly.
Question from Catherine, as we go back to a comment you made in hour number 1. Can you remote view distant past, say Pangea? We're all one continent?
You can remote view distant past, but again, the key is to be blind to the target. Because if I say to myself, I want to remote view Atlantis, Lemuria, Pangea, I'm going to, instead of remote viewing, I'm going to imagine in my mind everything I've ever read about Atlantis or Lemuria or Pangea. You know what I mean? I'm going to influence my reading. My remote viewing, I'm going to influence that by my preconceived ideas about that subject. So, yes, I can remote view them, but I need to remote view them. I need to have a partner who will put a whole bunch of things, like, for example, Joe McMoneagle, who was one of the remote viewers, from the early guys. What he does is anytime he has a question like that, he writes it down on a 3x5 card, and he puts it in a box. And he has a whole box full of 3x5 cards of things he would just like to remote view. And then to keep himself blind to the target, he'll just ask his wife every day to pull out a card and stick it in an envelope when he's out of the room, and then he just remote views it. That way he's not affected by it. He's not going to know what it is, what's in the envelope. He might have 500 of those cards, so he has, he's not going to remember what order they were in or whatever. His wife has grabbed one randomly, and he can remote view it.
The questions keep coming from our audience because they are right on their target tonight for this one. I like Eric's question here, and he is asking, do you think it would upset Jesus if we remote viewed the crucifixion?
No, as a matter of fact, I have a student who did remote view the crucifixion, and it wasn't on purpose. It was really uncanny. When for years and years, I've taught with students physically coming to my house to learn with me, and then more recently, we just recently changed the location of our training center, and I've been teaching online. But I had this student who came to my house, and I always kept a big stack of targets that like a 2-inch high stack of papers with things cut out from magazines and glued onto them as targets. And so they would be in a big folder, and I could say to the student, pick a number between 1 and 20, and they'd say like 18. I'd say, okay, from the top or the bottom? And they'd say from the bottom. Then I would just count up 18 from the bottom, and that would be the target they chose. Well, it was amazing because with student after student after student, the target they would choose really related to them, like a woman from China who flew from Hong Kong to take my course, and the target she chose was all about Hong Kong. Another woman from South Carolina, and the target she chose was all about South Carolina. And, another student who had friends in the Twin Towers, and then she had picked a target that had the Twin Towers in the background. There's just a lot of different things. So this one student was telling me that he had read Lynn Buchanan's book where they had given him Jesus as a target. And so in the story in Lynn's book, he had been viewing for months and years. He'd been viewing the thoughts and the intentions, the plans and intentions of world leaders. And most of them were pretty dark. And he really wished he could get a break. And so a kind project manager finally gave him Jesus as a target. So he has no idea who he is. He sits down to do another target thinking, okay, I'm going to access another world leader. And he starts doing the target, and he looks up and he says, I don't know what you think this guy did, but he did do whatever you think he did. He's a really great guy. This is a really good guy. I really love this guy. I want to be this guy. I want this guy to be my best friend. He just really got excited about viewing Jesus, and he ended up having this really deep spiritual experience. So this student had read this book, and he comes to take my class, and he says, I really wish I could get Jesus as a target. And, of course, I couldn't just go say, well, okay, I'm going to give you Jesus, because, again, it would have just he would have been so polluted, he wouldn't have remote viewed. So instead I said, well, sorry, I don't have Jesus in my stack. So you're not going to get Jesus while you're here, but maybe someday somebody will give you Jesus as a target. So he picks a number, and I pull, of course I have the student leave the room, or I leave the room, and I pull the target out, and it was a photograph of the face on the Shroud of Turin. And I did not even know that I had that in my target stack. I don't know how it ended up there. But I had this thing, and I thought, how bizarre that he wants to get Jesus as a target, and he ends up getting a photograph of the face on the Shroud of Turin. And he ended up remote viewing the crucifixion. But it ended up being a very joyous thing, because at the end of the viewing, he was really relating to all these people that had been touched by this amazing person, and he was describing the whole thing, and it was really very profound. It was a profound experience.
That is quite heavy. Let's get to Bill's question here. Is there any way to stop a remote viewer from seeing you?
Not if the remote viewer has been trained properly. It's, in the military, they did a ton of experimentation with trying to keep things from being able to be remote viewed, to see if they could protect things from being remote viewed. And they really found that it's almost impossible to protect something from being remote viewed. And the work that they did, where they did have a little bit of success, was extremely complex and extremely difficult. And I'm going to throw this out there, and people can just chew on it. I can't get into depth explaining it. But essentially, it involved altering the matrix. They literally had to kind of shift some things in the matrix of reality in order to keep something from being able to be remote viewed. And that's not an easy feat. So the bottom line is that if someone's going to remote view you, they can. But the sad thing that I've experienced, only occasionally, thankfully, very rarely, but one or two times, you know how when someone suffers from extreme delusions or schizophrenia, it's usually very narcissistic. And they start thinking that everyone's spying on them, the FBI, the CIA, that someone has entered their mind and is taking over their minds. And occasionally I'll get sad emails from people who are sure that their minds have been taken over, and there's cameras in their bathroom while they're trying to shower and use the bathroom, and people have taken over their, just that sort of thing. And it's very, very sad when people are locked into that thinking, because I always want to say, okay, so what is it about you that you are so important that everyone wants to view you? Why would someone want to remote view you? And usually it's a really extreme case of narcissism that makes this person think they are so important that everyone's trying to remote view them. So don't fall into that if that's you. Don't do that. Don't think that, because it's a really sad place to go and it's hard to get out of. So keep yourself healthy. Remind yourself that, hey, I'm not, it's like the old couple that was married, and they asked the old guy, how have you been married 60 years? How did you make it through a successful marriage? And he said, well, every morning I get up and look at myself in the mirror, and I say, hey, you ain't no bargain. So that's the thing to keep reminding yourself. Get up in the mirror and say, hey, I don't think I'm that important that anybody would want to remote view me. My mother one day said, Lori, I'm so worried about you. And I said, why? Why are you worried, Mom? She said, well, because you're so powerful, someone might try to hurt you. And it just cracked me up. I said, Mom, believe me, nobody's trying to hurt me. I'm just this short little round Italian lady that Italian American that is kind of, innocuous. I don't think anybody's really following me around or trying to do me in or anything. So I think that, it's really important to avoid paranoia as much as possible. Be cautious, be prudent, but don't get locked up into negative thinking and paranoia.
And a lot of people do. A lot of people, when they get into something along these lines, because they have had friends abandon them because of this situation or because of what they believe in, that it gets taken to a whole new level. And you can see where it's easy for people to fall into that trap. Yeah, for sure. I really do. And I've had some very sad encounters with people who were locked into that, and it's just so it just makes me feel very sad for them, because they can't get out, and they're just hopelessly stuck in that mindset. So don't let that happen. All right, let's move on to a question from Michael here. Earlier on in the show, you had mentioned that you had remote viewed Mars. What was that like? Well, excuse me. The minute I had my aesthetic impact, which again is the thing you want to look for in every session,
I knew I was on Mars. And, I mean, there was just, it was red, you know, it was red dirt, and the wind and the cold were amazing. And I was remote viewing in a very hot room. And at the time, I was going through menopause, where I was having hot flashes on top of hot rooms. So there I was, you know, just miserable doing the session. And the minute I had the aesthetic impact, suddenly my lips turned blue, my teeth were chattering, my husband had to go get a big blanket and wrap me up. I mean, I literally had a physical reaction to Mars. And the coldness really affected me really strongly. And I found myself standing amid these obelisks. And the obelisks were transmitting and receiving information. And my husband asked me if I would move to the source that was transmitting to the obelisks. And I instantly was in a totally different place. I wasn't on Mars anymore. But I was standing where I was seeing these beings that were a turquoise blue color. And they were kind of amorphous. It was hard to see what they looked like. They were almost shapeless. And I jokingly refer to them as the lava lamp people, because it reminded me of the stretchy stuff in a lava lamp that, you know, kind of has stretched up and formless. And they communicated to me some very important messages, primarily concern for the planet, the importance of frequencies and how frequencies apply to everything. And when this was many, many years ago that I did this session, and at that time I had never even thought about the word frequency or what frequencies are. It talked about waves. It got into physics, and I am not a physicist by any means. And so my husband, the forensic scientist, was on the edge of his chair listening to me share this information, because he knew that it was not something that was part of my lexicon at all, you know. And so the interesting thing about this session and these blue beings, etc., is that like 6 other top-notch remote viewers have had the same target on Mars, and all of them have had the same experience of finding the obelisks and encountering these blue beings, who communicated that they're trying to communicate with anyone who will communicate with them to try to save the planet before it's too late. And also the importance of love. They really talked about the importance of love, and how love isn't just an emotion, how love is a force like gravity. It's an actual power. And it's the only constant throughout every dimension and every universe that exists. So I thought that was a really, really interesting message. And all these remote viewers have gotten the same message. And in fact, after I had finished my session, I was contacted by Mel Riley, and that's when Mel and I became friends. He had worked the same session, the same target, and had had the exact same experience I had. And so it was quite a fascinating thing there.
Cousin Gary in Edmonton needs to have his question answered, because I'm going to get it in, because I think this is first or second time listening in. I keep my show kind of private from family, and he figured it out. Damn you, Cousin Gary. Anyways, have you ever done any remote viewing on world leaders, whether it's Trump, Putin, Kim Jong-un, or the idiot we got running this one?
No, I have not. I have not done any remote viewing on world leaders. Thankfully, I haven't been asked to, and I've never just voluntarily decided I wanted to. So that's one thing I haven't viewed.
Do you stay away from world leaders because of just the whole political spectrum on how that can explode into any type of negativity?
No, not really. I have had a couple of experiences. One was years and years ago, and this doesn't really, it's not exactly remote viewing, but several years ago, I get a lot of information through my dreams, and I remember when Bob Dole was running, and I just couldn't stand Bob Dole. I just couldn't stand him. I really disliked him. And then I had this dream that he and I were talking, and he was hilarious, and he was making me laugh and laugh, and I woke up from this dream really liking Bob Dole. And then shortly after that, Bob Dole started appearing on Saturday Night Live, and he was hilarious. And I went, oh, my gosh, my dream was really trying to tell me something about this person. Then I had another situation in which this pastor of a huge church and really top, like, religious leader and community leader in the town I was living in, who was constantly coming and talking to me and and things. In the job that I was working in, he would come frequently, and he asked me to be the head of the prayer breakfast and all these different things. And then I had a dream about him in which he was extremely lascivious and very, he was lascivious and very lecherous, and then after that I really realized that there was another side to him that I hadn't seen, and that the dream was trying to warn me. At that time I was young and cute and skinny and that sort of thing. So, and then there was with Trump, when Trump got elected, the minute I saw Trump on the escalator coming down to announce that he was going to run for president, I instantly knew he was going to be the president, and I was horrified, to be honest. I was absolutely horrified. And the night that he won, I watched the whole thing on television, and then I went to bed. And for the next several nights in a row, myself and several other really prominent psychics had dreams. We all had the same kind of dream about Trump, in which we were like having meals with him, or we were being invited to his hotel room where he was having parties, and he was like asking for advice and saying, what should I do, and how can I make them like me? And he was kind of a pathetic, sad character that kind of made us feel sorry for him in the dreams, and we were all dreaming the same thing. So I haven't remote viewed any political leaders, but I have had some interesting encounters with them in my dreams.
We got time to sneak in one more question here, and this one comes from Gloria. And she says, I think I'm way too much of a concrete thinker. Am I too stupid to remote view?
Not at all, Gloria. In fact, the thing I love about CRV is that my passion for teaching CRV is simply because it allows anyone, anywhere, to access any type of information in all of time and or space via a method which feels very safe, very scientific, very pragmatic, and allows you to analyze. It's got a whole part of it that's very analytical. So while many average folks are put off by anything that smacks of New Age or woo-woo or and they're very, very practical and down-to-earth, CRV has a scientific basis and the military history behind it, and that really attracts people who would normally never want to explore consciousness. So you're definitely not too stupid. You're not too left-brained. In fact, the hilarious thing is some of my best viewers came to my class, like engineers, for example, and they came just because they wanted to make sure their wives weren't getting into something weird, and they ended up doing really better than everybody in the class and blew everybody's mind, including their own. And so as someone who loves to dive into the heart of the mystery, I really feel that the exploration of consciousness is the latest and greatest new frontier. And my job as a tour guide of sorts, I guess you could say, is really the best job ever. So among my students, I've had the honor of teaching engineers, spies, detectives, CEOs of major corporations, celebrities, housewives, computer geeks, street cops. The list goes on and on. Lots of ordinary and extraordinary people. And my mentor's wife, Lynn Buchanan's wife, once commented, you don't have a business, you just have an ever-expanding circle of friends. And she's really right. I've taught all over the world. I've had students from all over the world, have traveled across the world to sit at my table and learn to tap into their own inner resources in order to travel through consciousness and the universe itself. And I just want to add that on a personal note, CRV has been the vehicle that has allowed me to reach beyond the realms of, quote-unquote, normal reality, if there is such a thing, to communicate with and share the consciousness of other beings, both dimensional and interdimensional, in this universe and other universes. And for me, CRV is a warm-up and a doorway. And once I walk through that doorway, I'm unlimited. So that's why I feel like anybody, to answer your question, yes, you can learn this. I feel like anybody can.
Excellent. Would you take the time to once again give out your website and your course schedule?
Yes, my website is intuitivespecialist.com. It's just http:// Intuitive Specialist with an S at the end of specialist, intuitivespecialist.com. And you can write to me at Lori@intuitivespecialist.com if you have any questions. If you just have generic questions, you can write info@intuitivespecialist.com. And the next basic course that I have is coming up September 15th through 17th. And it's a live online course. And for those of you listening who say, oh, I really don't do well with online courses, I'm going to be teaching in person near Los Angeles in October. and I'll be posting the dates and the actual exact location in this next coming week. We're still working out the final details, but I will be teaching not only basic, but I'll be teaching basic, intermediate, and advanced in Los Angeles. I think it's close. It's a suburb of Los Angeles. I'm not exactly sure of the name of it yet. But anyway, so anybody interested in wanting to take an in-person class, pay attention to my website, look at the calendar on my website, and it'll be popping up there. Basic, intermediate, advanced, in-person class.
Lori, thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. I'm going to get you to hold on while I wrap this thing up. If you're listening in, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal's little brother is watching, playing in the background. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio. Tomorrow night on the program, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, we got John Tenney back. Yes, the self-proclaimed paranormal weirdo is back for his bi-monthly slot here on the mighty SOR. Love having John on. It's going to be a lot of fun. Want to thank all of you in the audience for taking part tonight, spreading the word, sharing it on Twitter, on Facebook, other social media, telling your friends about it. And that's the way, my friends, that we own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, take us home.